This is the people of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump, SMZ 71,911 24ths. Appearances starting with the people.
For the people, ADAs, Joshua Steinglass, Matthew Colangelo, Susan Hoffinger, Becky Mangold, Christopher Conroy, and Catherine Ellis. Good morning.
Good morning. Emil Bove, joined by President Trump seated to my left, and joined by Todd Blanche, Susan Nichelles, and Kendra Wharton.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Trump. So, the matter called into the record is the people's motion for contempt. Before I hand down my decision, I did want to address the defense and Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, as you know, the prosecution has filed 3 separate motions asking this court to find you in contempt. In a moment, I am going to hand down my decision on the 3rd motion, which I find you in criminal contempt for the 10th time. It appears that the 1,000 fines are not serving as a deterrent. Therefore, going forward, this court will have to consider a jail sanction if recommended. Mr. Trump, it's important to understand that the last thing I want to do is to put you in jail. You are the former president of the United States and possibly the next president as well. There are many reasons why incarceration is truly a last resort for me. To take that step would be disruptive to these proceedings, which I imagine you want to end as quickly as possible. I also worry about the people who would have to execute that sanction. The court officers, the correction officers, the Secret Service detail, among others. I worry about them and about what would go into executing such a sanction. Of course, I'm also aware of the broader implications of such a sanction. The magnitude of such a decision is not one-sided. But at the end of the day, I have a job to do, and part of that job is to protect the dignity of the judicial system and compel respect. Your continued violations of this court's lawful order threaten to interfere with the administration of justice in constant attacks, which constitute a direct attack on the rule of law. I cannot allow that to continue. So as much as I do not want to impose a jail sanction, and I have done everything I can to avoid doing so, I want you to understand that I will, if necessary and appropriate. Do the attorneys have any other questions about that? I will now hand down the decision from the court. This is for the defense and this is for the people.
Whereupon the sergeant gives copies of the court's decision to the parties.
You can call the trial.
This is people of the state of New York against Donald J. Trump, indictment 71,543 23rds. Case on trial continued.
Okay, I believe we finished up a witness on Friday. We're going to start with a fresh witness today. Is there anything we need to go over from either side before we get started?
Just that redactions instruction I ask you to give before we start.
You would ask me to do that first thing?
If you don't mind.
Not at all. I believe there was no objection from the defense.
Not at all.
I'll do that first thing.
There are a number of exhibits we expect the people to offer through the next witness, who we expect to be Jeff McConney. We ask for an opportunity to express our objections outside the presence of the jury. It's very difficult. The people will hand Mr. McConney a thumb drive with a large number of exhibits contained on it. We prefer the court to look at them one by one beforehand.
How many exhibits are we talking about?
Your Honor, the people intend to admit about 26 exhibits through Mr. McConney.
Why wasn't this brought to my attention sooner? I could have been looking at them over the weekend or this morning.
I wish also we were notified sooner. The government notified us of this yesterday afternoon, that Mr. McConney would be taking the stand, and the exhibits are over 90. I wish we knew that beforehand also as well.
You said you would like to discuss this outside the presence of the jury. Are you asking to excuse the jury?
I don't think it will take that long. My point is, rather than asking for a sidebar to be heard, we prefer to do it in open court.
What are the exhibits?
Let me identify them. Just to flag, we identified the Trump Organization exhibits for the defense and asked them to identify for us any evidentiary objections they had about 2 weeks ago. On May 1st, they sent us an email identifying a number of exhibits, a number of objections to certain exhibits. I'll identify them for you now. But I anticipate we'll only be getting to about 8 or so exhibits today, many of where there are objections the parties need to discuss. Most of those objections, I understand, are about hearsay questions that I think would not be disruptive to handle at sidebar when it is introduced. There's at least one exhibit that was the subject of a defense motion, limine to exclude. That's the exhibit consisting of Mr. Weisselberg's handwritten notes on the Essential Consultants Bank statement. As Your Honor held in the defendant's motion in limine, the people are prepared to lay an appropriate business records foundation for that record today. Again, I think to the extent the defense has any objection after that foundation is laid, we can also handle that at sidebar.
Okay.
Judge, I still don't even know what the exhibits are within that range of 90 exhibits. With respect to Mr. Weisselberg's notes, this witness, McConney, testified in the grand jury that notes were discarded when he found them to be of no further use. The idea that he would be handed a thumb drive and asked a series of general questions with respect to a broad category of types of documents and tick off yes answers to those questions is just not sufficient under these circumstances. We do have specific objections to some of these exhibits, and
I have no problem with the people handing up the thumb drive, laying a foundation with the thumb drive. Then, as each exhibit is being introduced, not to the jury, you can make your objection, and we'll deal with it.
it's very hard for me to do that on the fly. I still don't know what the exhibits are.
How would it be any easier to do that outside the presence of the jury?
Because the government would identify which exhibits they're going to offer through the witness, and I can go through the list we sent them over the weekend of the objections.
You sent them a list?
Yes.
So, the exhibits being introduced contained within that list?
Yes, and I would like an opportunity to argue it before Your Honor so you can rule.
We'll do it at sidebar.
If there are 10 or 12 exhibits on this list, it's not tenable for me to do it in real time with these things. Would it not be more orderly to go through it one by one?
I don't want to keep the jury waiting.
It's not an issue I created. I just found out about the witness yesterday.
And when you found out about it yesterday, it's an issue I could have gone through yesterday and this morning. Now that the jury is here, we'll go through the witness and the exhibits, and you will be given an opportunity to make your objections one by one. But I don't think there's a reason for the people to preclude the thumb drive.
I'm not asking for a preclusion remedy. I'm asking for an opportunity to argue my objections.
You'll be given an opportunity to argue your objections.
Not for this witness. Before the next witness, we would like to be heard. We have an objection to the witness testifying.
It doesn't have to be now?
Yes, Your Honor.
I'll hear you then. Let's get the jury, please.
All rise, jury entering, whereupon the jurors are present and properly seated. Do both sides stipulate that all jurors are present and properly seated?
Yes.
Good morning, jurors. Welcome back. I hope you had a good weekend. Jurors, before we call our first witness of the day, I want to give you certain instructions. We have noted certain exhibits have been admitted into evidence, but some material is what we call redacted. These redactions were made to remove personal identifying information and assure that only relevant admissible evidence is put before you. You may not speculate as to what material has been redacted, and you may not draw any inference either favorable or unfavorable to either party. With respect to certain information being redacted, you may call your witness.
The people called Jeffrey McConney.
Witness entering, whereupon the witness takes the witness stand.
Hi, Your Honor.
State your full name, spelling your last name.
Jeffrey McConney, McConney.
Your county of residence.
Manhattan County, New York County.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. McConney.
Good morning, sir.
Please describe your educational background, starting with college.
Yes, I graduated Baruch College in 1978. While I was working in Baruch, I worked part-time for a real estate firm, Joseph Ratner Company. When I graduated, I went to work for an accounting firm, Spar, Locker, Burke, and Namer. From there, I was hired by the Trump Organization.
About what year were you hired by the Trump Organization?
1987.
Are you still working for the Trump Organization?
I'm retired happily.
When did you retire?
February of 2023.
What was your position when you first joined the Trump Organization in 1987?
I was assistant controller.
What was your position when you retired from the Trump Organization last year?
Senior vice president, controller.
How many years in total did you work for the Trump Organization?
It was a little short of 37.
When you left the Trump Organization last year, did you sign a separation agreement?
Yes.
And did that include separation payments?
Yes.
How are those payments paid?
They were quarterly payments made at the end of every calendar quarter.
Are those payments now complete?
Yes.
While you were working at the Trump Organization, did you also do any outside work?
You mean outside the personal tax returns on my own? Yes.
Okay, please describe that work.
I prepared personal tax returns, 1 or 2 tax returns, since the time I worked at Sparlacker until now.
How many years did you do work as a tax preparer?
Almost 50.
Are you still preparing tax returns?
I'm trying to get my clients to work. To answer your question, yes.
Are you here today in response to a subpoena from the district attorney's office?
Yes.
Are you represented by counsel here today?
Yes.
Who is paying for your attorney?
The Trump Organization.
You mentioned the Trump Organization a few times this morning. What is the Trump Organization?
To me, there's 2 definitions. As an accountant, there are 2 legal entities, the Trump Organization, Inc., and the Trump Organization, LLC. So that's legal entities. Most people refer to the Trump Organization as President Trump's global holding and ownership of various assets, license deals, intellectual property, or whatever.
So, does the name the Trump Organization refer collectively to all of the different entities that Mr. Trump owns?
That's usually the way I refer to it.
During the time you worked for the Trump Organization, who ran the company?
President Trump.
And before 2017, what was Mr. Trump's role in the Trump Organization?
I'm not sure. He ran the organization. He was the brains behind it. I don't know how to answer that question.
When you worked there, did you consider Mr. Trump your boss?
Yes.
Have you had any conversations with Mr. Trump since you retired from the Trump Organization last February?
No.
You mentioned that the Trump Organization refers collectively to a number of different entities. How many entities are part of the Trump Organization?
Before I retired, I don't know what they've done since. I believe it was over 500.
And can you describe the relationship between those entities and the Trump Organization?
That gets a little... With the Trump Organization, you have to drop the org because that's an entity. All those entities are owned, ultimately now, by the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
Okay, I'll ask you about the trust in a minute. For the entities that make up the Trump Organization, what kind of businesses are they in?
Golf courses, real estate, licensing deals. That's the bulk of the business types. Management company.
Before you retired, did you have a work email address?
Yes.
What was the domain name for your email address?
Trumporg.com.
Where was the Trump Organization headquartered before?
725 Fifth Avenue in New York City.
Where was your office located?
725 Fifth Avenue, New York City.
Is that also called Trump Tower?
Yes.
You testified a minute ago that legally the Trump Organization itself doesn't hold any assets. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there an entity that holds the Trump Organization's assets?
Well, each entity, the way we set everything up is each asset was owned by a separate entity and sometimes multiple entities. So Trump Tower would have been owned by an entity, Trump Commercial LLC, and may have had a few members in that entity. And does that answer your question?
Yes. Do all those entities roll up ultimately to, I think you mentioned the trust a minute ago? Do they all roll up to the trust?
Yes, that's the ultimate owner.
Who's the official owner officially of the trust?
President Trump?
Please display for the witness, the court, and counsel a document marked for identification as People's 86. Let me know if you see that on your screen, Mr. McConney.
Yes.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a summarized structure chart of the Donald Trump Revocable Trust and the ownership layers below it.
Does the first page of that chart refer to a number of attached schedules?
Yes.
Let's display page 2, please. Is this one of the schedule's records on the first page?
Yeah, that's the whole schedule, or part of yes.
What's the date on the top right of that page?
As of January 20th, 2017.
Did you have an opportunity to review all of the pages in People's 86 before testifying today?
Yes.
And what do the remaining pages include?
The pages lay out the ownership structure of which entity is owned by or owned another entity.
Who prepared this document?
I don't know who. I'm under the impression or the understanding that the Trump Organization legal department prepared this document.
And when did you first see it?
I believe sometime in early 2017.
Was this document made in the regular and ordinary course of business?
Yes, it was.
Was it the regular practice of the Trump Organization to prepare documents depicting the ownership structure of the entities that made up the Trump Organization?
Yes, sir.
Was this document prepared at or about the time the Trump Organization entities were moved into the trust?
Yes, sir.
Was the person or persons who prepared this document under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes, sir.
I offer People's 86 into evidence.
No objection.
People's 86 is accepted into evidence.
Please publish People's 86 in full. Let's go back to page 1. Mr. McConney, can you read what it says across the top of this chart, please?
The very top line?
Yes, please.
Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
What does it say below that?
Dated April 7th, 2014.
Does this chart depict the trust ownership structure that you just described?
Yes, some of it, yes.
Does it show various holding companies that themselves hold various entities, which all make up the Trump Organization?
Yes.
And do they all roll up to the trust?
Yes.
You may have mentioned this a minute ago. The chart refers to a number of attached schedules. Are you familiar with those schedules?
Yes.
Please turn to page 2. What do those schedules show?
Usually a description of what the entities below it or the relationship or ownership of what those entities have to another entity. In this case, DJT Management Holdings. LC owns 100% of all the entities below it.
Do the remaining schedules in this show the 500 or so entities were owned by the trust as of January of 2017?
Yes.
When was the trust itself created?
I'm not too sure. I think the first page said 2014, but I'm really not sure.
Let's go back to the first page. Let me direct your attention to the top. Is that the date you're referring to?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding based on that when the trust was created?
We didn't use it in 2014 or 15, so I don't know if that's when it was set up. I'm not a lawyer, so that's my guess that it was set up in April of 2014.
In 2017, who were the trustees of the trust?
Donald J. Trump Jr. and Alan Weisselberg.
You testified a minute ago that your position when you retired from the Trump Organization was Senior Vice President and Controller, is that right?
Yes, sir.
When did you first become the Controller?
16, 17, 18 years ago. I don't remember the exact year.
Right before you were promoted to the position of Controller, who held that position at the Trump Organization?
Alan Weisselberg.
And how did the position of the Controller become open?
Alan was promoted to CFO or Chief Financial Officer, and then I was promoted to Controller.
As Controller, who did you report to directly?
Alan Weisselberg.
How long was Mr. Weisselberg your supervisor?
From the day I was hired to the day he left.
More than 3 decades?
Yes.
How often did you interact with Mr. Weisselberg during the time he was the Chief Financial Officer?
Other than having lunch every day, whenever I needed to. His office was next to mine. If he needed to find me or if I needed to find him, I'd find him.
In the time period from 2015 to 2016, who did Mr. Weisselberg report to?
Prior to January 20th of 2017?
Yes.
Mr. President Trump.
Did Mr. Weisselberg meet regularly with Mr. Trump on organizational matters?
I'm sure he met with him. I don't know if it was regularly or not.
What were your responsibilities as Controller?
I oversaw the 401k plan. I processed payroll. I interfaced with the accounting firm to make sure they had the necessary information to prepare financial statements, tax returns. I worked on loan documents, tried to make sure we adhered to the loan covenants, oversaw the accounting department at 725 Fifth Avenue. There may be a few more things.
Did part of your responsibilities in overseeing the accounting department include overseeing the general ledger?
Yes.
Did those responsibilities also include overseeing accounts payable?
Yes.
Did those responsibilities also include overseeing expense payments?
Not really overseeing them. I mean, they really didn't go through me for processing. I know of them, but they were mainly handled by accounts payable directly.
And was accounts payable part of the accounting department?
Yes.
And you oversaw the accounting department as a whole?
Yes.
In your role as Controller, and in the period from 2015 to 2017, were there employees that reported to you?
Yes.
How many?
Around 10.
Was one of those employees Deb Tarasoff?
Yes.
What was Ms. Tarasoff's role in the accounting department?
She was the accounts payable supervisor.
Can you tell the jury what accounts payable means?
Accounts payable means when you or an entity owes somebody money.
Was Rebecca Minocchio part of the staff of the accounting department?
Yes.
Is she one of the people who reported to you?
Yes.
What was Ms. Minocchio's role?
Around that time, she was an administrative assistant. She moved up to the accounts receivable department somewhere in the last few years. I don't remember exactly when.
What does accounts receivable mean?
Accounts receivable is the other side, when somebody owes you money.
You mentioned that one of your functions as Controller was overseeing the general ledger, is that right?
Yes.
What is a general ledger?
General, there are 2 books of original entry in accounting. You have cash receipts, the money you receive, and cash disbursements, the money you spend. The general ledger puts that information together. The information is posted by the general ledger accounts receipts, so you can see different types of expenses, payroll, gas, electric, how much you're spending at a different point in time.
Does the general ledger keep track of all the interactions the general ledger makes?
Yes.
You mentioned the term cash receipts. Does that include money coming in?
Yes.
You also mentioned cash disbursements. Does that mean money going out?
Yes.
Through your role as Controller, were you familiar with the way the Trump Organization kept and maintained its general ledgers?
Yes.
Does each entity that makes up the Trump Organization have its own general ledger?
if an entity has a bank account, it has a general ledger. There are a number of entities that we have that did not have a bank account, so they did not have a general ledger. So, for argument's sake, if we would set up an LLC, the LLC would pay for the transactions. So it would have a bank account. The member corp would be a 1% member or 1/10% member. We didn't feel it was a reason for it to have a bank account. Any expenses for that entity could be paid someplace else, so there was no reason to have a bank account or a ledger.
For any entity that did have a bank account, it had a general ledger?
Yes.
Did the Trump Organization headquarters in Manhattan oversee the accounting for all the entities that make up the Trump Organization?
Not all of them, no.
Which ones were excluded?
Basically, the golf courses and the hotels, they had their own accounting staff. We maintained and took care of all the other entities.
Okay, so everything except hotels and golf courses?
Yes.
As controller, was it part of your job responsibility to make sure the general ledger was accurate?
Yes.
Is the general ledger computerized?
Yes.
Did the Trump Organization use a particular software program to maintain its general ledgers?
Yes.
What was the name of that software program?
We called it MDS. I think it was short for Multi-Data Services or Multi-Data Systems. I'm not too sure the correct name.
But you called it MDS?
MDS?
Please explain briefly what MDS is.
MDS is a computer program where you can record your cash receipts, money that you received, your bills that you pay, your accounts payable cash disbursements. You can run various reports for cash receipts, cash disbursements, general ledgers, trial balances, information that the accountants would need to prepare tax returns or financial statements.
How long did the Trump Organization use MDS as its computerized general ledger?
That was one of my first jobs back in the 80s to set up the accounting system. So we used it from the day it was up and running, sometime in 1990 or 91. It was still in use when I left.
Who enters information into the general ledger system?
Mainly the accounting department.
Does that include the people we mentioned, Ms. Tarasoff, for example?
Right. Deb would enter bills to be paid.
Can you use MDS to generate reports?
Yes.
What kind of reports can MDS generate?
There are standard reports you can run for accounts payable if you wanted to see how many bills you had that weren't paid. If you wanted to see what vendors. That doesn't make sense. On cash receipts, we can run multi-cash reports, tenant ledgers, rent rolls. There's a variety of reports that you can run. You can also customize your own reports.
Could you customize a report to show only certain kinds of expenses from one account?
Yes.
Did you run reports from the general ledger for tax purposes?
Yes.
Describe that, please.
The accounting firm would, at the beginning of the year, would start giving us a list of entities that they wanted trial balance or general ledgers for. We would run the entire general ledger and trial balance and send it to them. That's things we did for all the 17? Yeah.
Does the accounting department maintain the general ledger for the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust account?
Yes.
Is that general ledger managed using MDS?
Yes.
Does the accounting staff or accounting department also maintain bank accounts for the trust?
Yes.
What does that entail?
When a bank statement comes in at the end of the month, we reconcile the bank statement. If a deposit comes in cash received, we received money from an entity or person that owes the trust money, we record it in cash receipts. If a bill is paid, some charged bill, real estate tax bill, that's paid out of the trust. That's also recorded in the electronic system.
How long has the accounting department had bank accounts for the trust?
That program was written sometime, I believe, in the 90s or whenever that program was written, from that point forward. So we maintained within multi-data from that point forward, we always maintained bank accounts once we opened them.
Does the accounting department maintain general ledgers for Mr. Trump's personal accounts?
Yes.
Does that account have a particular account code?
It has a company code, which is an abbreviation used in order to find information or process information. The code is DJT.
When you say company code of DJT, can you describe what that means?
You have your 5 or 6 digit code in the system you're allowed to use. So if you want to prohibit a cash disbursement or a list of payments, you have to pick a company. Instead of writing Donald J. Trump, you would just write in PGT and company. It would access information. It separated each entity by itself. It was just a short abbreviation for the entity name.
So each entity had its own code, and the code for Mr. Trump's account was DJT. Is that right?
For his personal account, yes.
Does the accounting staff maintain the general ledger for the DJT account using MDS?
Yes.
Did the accounting staff also maintain the books and records for Mr. Trump's bank accounts?
Yes.
Does that include any checking accounts?
Yes.
In the 2017 time period, did Mr. Trump use a Capital One checking account as his main operating account?
I believe so, yes.
Was the accounting department also responsible for making sure that all of the entities that are part of the Trump organization had sufficient cash available for them?
Yes.
Can you describe that cash management process, please?
We had, over time, I had this position years ago. Different people had it over time. Once a week, on a set day, we would run reports on multi-data to see what our cash balance was. We would receive reports from the outside properties, the golf courses, and the hotels to see what their cash balance was. And they would do a projection for us of how much they needed for the week and how much they expected to receive for the week. Someone would put this together and see if an entity had money to spend or excess money to distribute. For example, if a rental property like Trump Tower had rental receipts that could distribute money to the owner, and if there was another project going on at the golf course, we could then fund that entity.
How often did the accounting department sort of prepare that cash acquisition analysis?
This was done on a weekly basis.
So if an entity had excess funds to distribute, where would it be distributed to?
It would be distributed to the owner.
With the owner here being the DJT account?
Prior to June 20th, it was the Donald J. Trump personal account. After June 20th, it should have been the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
When you say June 20th, do you mean January 20th?
Sorry, January 20th, 2017.
If an entity needed money before January 20th, 2017, were funds transferred to that entity from the DJT account?
Yes.
After January 20th, 2017, were those funds transferred to or from the Revocable Trust account?
Yes.
You mentioned that at one point in time, you were responsible for preparing the cash acquisition analysis.
Yes.
Did you have any interactions with Mr. Trump about the cash acquisition analysis?
I would hand deliver the report to him once a week.
Did you have any particular interactions with him when giving him the report at any point in time?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jury, please?
Early on, I think I was employed for about a year. President Trump was on the phone. I walked into his office, dropped a report on his desk, turned around, and he said, "Jeff, hold on a minute." Sorry. He said to who he was talking to, the person on the phone, "Hold on a minute," and turned around and said, "Jeff, you're fired," and started talking to the person on the phone again. I stood there until he got off the phone call, and he said, "You're not fired, but my cash balances went down from last week." He said, "I know you negotiated this." He said, "Now focus on my bills." It was a teaching moment. Just because somebody is asking for money, negotiate with them, talk to them. Just don't do it mindlessly. Think before you do it.
Are you familiar with a process by which the Trump Organization accounting staff cuts checks?
Yeah.
Describe that process generally, please.
An approved invoice is received. Deb would stamp it with her stamp. She would put a code on it. I believe she puts a dollar amount on the voucher, or when she puts it in the system, it creates a voucher. She would put a voucher number on it. So the voucher is in the multi-data system. When she was ready to pay it, she would select a voucher, and we would print the check on the checks that we had. She would attach a check to the invoice and give it to the person who's the signatory on the account. The check would be signed, and then she mailed them out.
You mentioned someone named Deb. Is that Deb Tarasoff you mentioned before?
Deb Tarasoff.
As a matter of course, did the Trump Organization ever cut a check if no invoice was submitted?
Of course not.
Is that true from checks cut from the trust account?
Usually we tried to get an invoice for any wire transfer check.
You mentioned that Ms. Tarasoff generally handled that process. Is that because she is the accounts payable supervisor?
She is the accounts payable department.
She is the department?
As of this point, and when I left, she was the only one left in accounts payable.
Must an invoice be approved before a check is cut?
Yes.
Who has authority to approve invoices?
President Trump when, before he became president, Alan Weisselberg, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, when Ivanka Trump was working for us, Ivanka Trump, Alan Weisselberg, Matthew Calamari, those were the general approvers.
Did you have authority to approve any invoices?
No.
In the instances when you were going to Mr. Weisselberg to pay, how did you request approval?
When I had a piece of paper, I'm an old-timer. I like pieces of paper. I would bring it to Alan Weisselberg, ask him to approve it. If it came via email, I would forward the email and ask him to approve it.
If you send him an email for approval, did he sometimes send approval via email?
Yes.
Sometime in 2016 and 2017, if a check was approved and checks were cut, who had check signature authority from the DJT account?
The personal account, just President Trump.
In 2017, who had signature authority on the trust accounts?
The trust account, I believe, was Eric Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and Alan Weisselberg.
For checks that were cut from the trust account, how many signatures were required per check?
There were two different situations. Checks less than $10,000 could be signed by any of the 3 signatories. Checks over $10,000 had to be signed by 2 signatories.
Did the accounting department also handle expense reimbursements?
Yes.
Are you familiar with the process by which Trump Organization employees can be reimbursed for expenses they incurred on behalf of the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Please describe that process.
If they did their expenses, there was an expense report they would have to complete, which would entail the employee's name, the entity that the expense was incurred on behalf of, the date of the invoice, the vendor's name, the dollar amount. They would total off the amount. They would sign the expense sheet and get their supervisor to approve it. Once it was approved, it was sent to Deb for payment. Deb Tarasoff.
If an employee receives an expense reimbursement from the Trump Organization, is the employee required to report that reimbursement as taxable income on their tax return?
No.
So, if an employee paid out $100 for a Trump Organization expense, how much would that employee get as a reimbursement?
$100.
Generally speaking, if a lawyer receives payment for legal services rendered, is that taxable income for the attorney?
An outside attorney or a Trump Organization attorney?
An outside attorney.
An outside attorney, I would assume so, yes.
Let me hand up a thumb drive containing what has been marked for identification as Peoples 35, 36, 37, A to K 39, 40, 43, 44, 45, 48, 49, 54, 55, 81, and 93. Have you had an opportunity to review the documents contained on that thumb drive?
Yes, sir.
How do you know?
My scribble is on the thumb, my initial and today's date.
Did you look at that thumb drive earlier today?
Yes, very early today.
Did you look at all the files on the thumb drive?
Yes, sir.
You signed and dated it after you reviewed it?
Yes, sir.
Do the exhibits on this thumb drive include reports from the general ledger for the DJT account?
Yes.
Do exhibits on this thumb drive include reports for the general ledger for the trust accounts?
Yes.
Do these exhibits include emails including invoices approved for payment?
Yes.
Do these exhibits include notes regarding payments?
Yes.
Do these exhibits include Form 1099-S?
Yes.
Does the Trump Organization keep records relating to the checks it cuts?
Yes.
Does that include records for checks cut from the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust account?
Yes.
If I refer to that as the trust account going forward, will you know I mean the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust account?
Yes.
Does that include records for the checks cut from the DJT account?
Yes.
Do those records include invoices?
Yes.
Do those include entries for the general ledger?
No.
Can you explain?
We don't print out the general ledger, so we have... I'll try to describe it. When you print a check, the record for that check and the information that you put in is in multi-data. You can access it at any time. You can print it at any time. But we don't print out that general ledger for every single check we cut. So we have a copy of the check or the original check and the invoices behind it. We then scan it and try to attach it to the document in multi-data. So we don't really have the general ledger attached when we sign the check. I don't know if I'm off topic or not.
Setting aside whether you maintain the general ledger entries as part of the checks cut, does the Trump Organization separately maintain records of entries that are made in the general ledger?
Yes.
With respect to the records we just discussed, invoices, entries in the general ledger, and checks, was it the business practice of the Trump Organization to make and keep those records?
Yes.
And was it the business practice of the Trump Organization to make and keep notes regarding payments it made?
Yeah.
Were those records made and kept in the regular and ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Were those records made at the time of the transactions they reflected, or within a reasonable time thereafter?
Yes.
Was the person who made or kept those records under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes.
Does the Trump Organization have an email system that allows you to send and receive messages?
Yes.
Does that email system record the dates and times that those messages were sent and received in?
Yes.
Is it part of the Trump Organization's business practice to make and keep records of email messages sent and received?
Yes.
Are those records kept in the regular and ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Does the email system keep records of those messages at the same time they're sent?
Yes.
Are business decisions sometimes made by email?
Yes.
Have you previously communicated with Michael Cohen using the Trump Organization's email system?
Yes.
What was your Trump Organization email address in the 2017 time period?
I believe it was jmcconey@trumporg.com.
In communicating with Mr. Cohen using your Trump Organization email account, did you ever email him at a Gmail account?
Yes.
Did you communicate with Alan Weisselberg using the Trump Organization's email system?
Yes.
In the 2017 time period, was Mr. Weisselberg's email address weisselberg@trumporg.com?
I believe so, yes.
Did you communicate with Deborah Tarasoff using Trump Organization email?
Yes.
In the 2017 time period, was her email address darasoff@trumporg.com?
I believe so, yes.
Were records of those communications stored in the Trump Organization's email system?
Yeah.
I offer into evidence the following exhibits: People's 37A to K, 39, 40, 43, 44, 45, 48, 49, 54, and 55.
Your Honor, we object to 37A through K, 45, 54, 55. I think there were other documents on that thumb drive that have not yet been offered, and we'll wait for those.
So, you're not objecting to 39, 40, 43, 44, 48, and 49?
Correct, Judge.
Those are received into evidence. As far as 37A through K, 45, 54, and 55, I find that the people have laid the business records foundation, but you reserve the right to object individually to these as we come across them.
Thank you, Judge.
Are you familiar with someone named Michael Cohen?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Cohen?
Michael was employed by the Trump Organization for a number of years. I've had conversations with him by the coffee machine.
How many years did you work together?
I was there as long as he was, so I don't remember how long he was there. 5 years, 10 years?
When did he leave the Trump Organization?
January 27th. Well, I don't know when he left the Trump Organization. The last day he was paid through was January 27th, 2017.
What was his position in the Trump Organization?
He said he was a lawyer.
Did he work in the legal department?
I guess so.
Directing your attention to the time period around January 2017, did you become aware that Mr. Cohen needed to be reimbursed for money he was owed?
Yes.
How did you first become aware?
I had a conversation with Alan Weisselberg.
When did you have those conversations, that conversation?
I don't remember specifically. Sometime in January 2017?
Was anyone else present when you discussed this with Mr. Weisselberg?
I don't think so. I don't remember.
Please describe the conversation that you had.
Alan said we had to get some money to Michael. Reimburse Michael. He tossed a pad towards me, and I started taking notes on what Alan said. That's how I found out about it.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about what Mr. Weisselberg said about the money that had to get paid to Mr. Cohen.
Well, there were two parts of the conversation. One reason I remember the January 27th date is I used to do payroll. Michael's last day was supposed to be January 20th, and we changed it to January 27th. I needed to know that, so I would stop paying him at a certain point in time. There was also information he had a complaint about his prior year bonus, so he wanted to get paid for that. And then there was some other money he was owed, so we just added everything up and came up with the amount we would have had to pay him.
You said in one conversation Mr. Weisselberg described these and asked you to take care of it?
It was one continuous conversation, one conversation.
And in that conversation, did Mr. Weisselberg also give you a bank statement with notes on it?
I don't think it was at that time. I got it at a later time.
Okay. Can you please describe the later time when you got the bank statement?
Alan gave me the bank statement and said, just keep it in the files.
Can we display People's Exhibit 35 from the thumb drive for the witness, the court, and the parties only? Mr. McConney, I'm now showing you a document that's been marked People's 35. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
This is the bank statement that Alan gave me to put in the files.
Is there handwriting on this document?
There are two sets of handwriting on the bottom of the document.
Do you recognize the handwriting?
I recognize the handwriting on the left side of the page, but not the right side of the page.
Whose handwriting do you recognize on the left side of the page?
That belongs to Alan Weisselberg.
How do you recognize his handwriting?
I've read his handwriting for about 35 years.
Did Mr. Weisselberg sometimes take and keep notes that recorded financial decisions?
Yes.
A minute ago, you said Mr. Weisselberg gave you a bank statement when you were discussing the payments to Mr. Cohen. Is that right?
He gave it to me related to the payments. I don't remember exactly when he gave it to me. I took my notes at a later date. He gave me this bank statement.
By this bank statement, you're referring to the one being displayed right now, People's 35.
Yes, sir.
Is this a true and exact copy of the same piece of paper Mr. Weisselberg gave you in connection with those discussions?
Yes, sir.
Without describing the details, does Mr. Weisselberg's handwriting set out various calculations that reflect the total amount to be repaid in monthly intervals?
Yes.
I think you said this a minute ago. Did Mr. Weisselberg direct you to keep this document in the files?
Yes.
Did you keep it in the files?
Yes.
Where did you keep it?
I kept it in a payroll book I had in a locked drawer in my office. I actually had this document and another document stapled together in a book.
In a book in a locked drawer in your office?
Yes.
Can we display People's 36 for identification only to the people, the witness, the court, and the parties? Do you have People's 36?
It's the one with my chicken scratch on a trump pad, yes.
Are these the notes you just described taking during the conversation that you had with Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
This is your handwriting?
That's my handwriting.
Did you take these notes as Mr. Weisselberg was speaking to you?
Yes.
Is this a true and accurate copy of what you wrote down?
Yes.
Did Mr. Weisselberg tell you to write it down?
Yes, he kind of threw the pad at me and said, "Take this down."
Did you sometimes take and keep notes to record financial decisions?
Yes.
Without giving any details yet, do these notes also set out various calculations that reflect a total amount to be repaid at monthly intervals?
Yes.
Did you keep this document in the files as well?
Yes, this was the document that was stapled to the next statement, the bank statement we just looked at.
People's 35 and 36 were stapled together?
35, I'll take your word, it's 35 and 36. Yes.
Withdrawn. Your notes and Mr. Weisselberg's notes on the bank statement were stapled together, kept in the payroll book in the locked drawer in your office?
Yes.
Was it the business practice of the Trump organization to make and keep records of financial obligations to be paid from the DJT account?
Yes.
And the two documents we just looked at, were they made and kept as part of your regular course of business?
Yes.
Were these documents made at or about the time of the conversations they record?
Yes.
Were you and Mr. Weisselberg under a business duty to keep accurate records?
Yes.
I offer People's 35 and People's 36 into evidence.
No objection.
People's 35 and 36 are accepted into evidence.
Let's display People's 35 for everyone, please. Mr. McConney, let me direct your attention to the top left-hand corner of the document. What is the title of the document?
Account statement.
What does it say directly underneath that?
Simplified business checking.
In the top right corner, does it indicate anything about the financial institution?
Yes.
What does it say?
First Republic Bank.
What is the name on the bank account?
Essential Consultants, LLC, care of Michael Cohen.
Directing your attention now, about halfway down the page, to the section that reads Account Summary. Can you read the amount that is listed next to total withdrawals and debits?
$130,035.
Let me direct your attention lower down the page to the section that reads Account Activity. Can you read the transaction just below withdrawals and debits?
The first one was the date of October 27th. Domestic wire funds debit, Keith M. Davidson Associates, PLC.
What's the amount?
$130,000.
Now let me direct your attention to the handwriting on the bottom left of the page. Do you recognize that handwriting?
Yes, that's Alan Weisselberg's handwriting.
Can you please read what Mr. Weisselberg wrote on the bank statement?
Starts at the top. $180,000. It's underlined. Grossed up to $360,000. Add additional bonus, $60,000. The two amounts are added together for $420,000. Then he divides it by, that's at 12, which equals off to the right, that's $35,000 per month effective February 1st, 17.
So, I would like to make sure the jury understands each of the numbers in that equation, starting with the 180,000 figure. Where does the 180,000 figure in Mr. Weisselberg's notes come from?
TEU pull out and scroll up to the right. It's a combination of two amounts.
Can we show the entire bottom part of this document?
So it's a total of the domestic wire transfer for $130,000 plus the $50,000 paid to Red Finch for tech services.
So does the 180,000 amount reflect the total amount owed to Michael Cohen on his request for reimbursement for the $130,000 to Keith Davidson and $50,000 to Red Finch?
Yes.
Mr. Weisselberg's notes then say grossed up to $360,000, right?
Yes.
What does grossed up mean?
I don't know exactly what it meant, but he probably meant, so for tax purposes, if Michael recorded $360,000 income, he would net, assuming a 50% tax rate, $180,000.
Objection. Move to strike the last part of that.
Overruled.
So you are familiar with the concept of grossing up to offset taxes?
Yes.
You worked as a tax preparer. You have worked as tax preparer, I think you said, for 5 decades.
Yes.
Have you prepared individual tax returns for individual city residents?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding of whether some New York City residents are taxed approximately 50% on their income?
Between federal taxes, state taxes, New York state taxes, and New York City taxes, that's about right.
Do you know where Michael Cohen lived in 2017?
Yes.
Where did he live?
Do you want the address?
No, I'm sorry.
In New York City.
I'm sorry, did he live in New York City?
Yes.
Thank you. Going back to the line in Mr. Weisselberg's handwritten notes that reads, grossed up attorney $360,000. I think you said this, but is that double $180,000?
Yes.
Moving to the next line in Mr. Weisselberg's notes. You testified a minute ago that this reads additional bonus $60,000, right?
Yes.
Did you discuss this additional bonus with Mr. Weisselberg?
No, on my sheet I wrote down 50,000, which is incorrect, but whatever, that's what Alan told me. I didn't really discuss it with him.
Did you have an understanding that the payment was to include an additional bonus?
Yes, Michael was complaining that his bonus wasn't large enough for the prior year, so this was, I guess, to make up for whatever he thought he was owed.
And did those amounts then total $420,000?
Yes.
And you said Mr. Weisselberg's notes then show that total being divided by 12 to equal $35,000 per month, correct?
Yes.
Did he explain to you what that meant?
That was just math.
Did you have an understanding as to how the payments were going to be made?
Yes.
What was that understanding?
At that point in time, we were going to send a wire transfer to Michael for $35,000 per month, starting February 1st of 2017.
You mentioned a few times that you took notes during a conversation you had with Mr. Weisselberg about these repayments. Is that right?
Yes, let's display People's 36 in evidence.
Starting at the top of this document, what is this?
This is the notes I was taking when Alan was talking to me and explaining to me what we owed Michael and how we were going to pay him.
And what this piece of paper that you were writing on?
I'm not sure I understand your question. It was a notepad.
That answers my question.
Okay.
And can you describe to the jury the circumstances when you wrote down these notes?
This was during the first meeting that, when I found out that we owed Michael money, me and Alan threw a pad on the desk and said, "Just take notes." And Alan started rattling off stuff, some of which I wrote directly, some of which I did not.
Can you please read out loud the handwritten text starting at the top?
The top starts with Michael Cohen, pay through January 20th, 2017. That was the original line. The 20th was crossed out and replaced by 27th, which would be the day I took him off or the last day I would pay him through. Then it says bonus 50,000, then 180,000. 180,000 times 2 for taxes. The original number I had was just the 50,000 and the 180, and that's where the 230 comes from. The 230 is crossed out. And then when I add the second 180,000, I come up with a total of 410,000. Then he said, use 420, because I was possibly rattling the numbers back to Alan, and he said, no, the number 420. Instead of figuring out what I did write, I wrote 420. So I used 420, and I divided it by 12, so that's 35,000 per month effective February 1st, 17, which was 2017. We were to wire the funds monthly from Mr. Trump's, President Trump's personal account, which was used to wire money from DJT. And underneath that, start 35,000 per month, January 2017. Mike to invoice us.
So did these notes refer to the same reimbursement as the handwritten notes on the First Republic Bank statement that we just discussed?
Yes.
What does pay through January 20th, which you started to say changed to through January 27th? What does that mean?
January 27th, I'm assuming, was the end of a payroll week. So that's when I was originally told to take Michael off payroll. That one was changed to January 27th. So that's the last day he was to be paid.
And that's the last day he was paid as an employee of the Trump organization?
Yes, I'm sorry, as an employee, yes.
And below that, you said the next line down reads bonus 50,000, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Weisselberg's notes said the additional bonus was 60,000. Is that right?
Yes.
What accounts for the difference?
I made a boo-boo. It was a fast conversation. I just scribbled down notes, and that's the number that I wrote down.
But the actual bonus amount was 60,000. Is that right?
Right. That's why the correction was when I had totaled to the 410,000, my bonus number was incorrect. That's when Alan said, use the 420,000. And I went back to correct the 50,000 to 60,000.
The next line down in your handwritten notes reads 180,000, right?
Yes.
Is that the same 180,000 reflected in Mr. Weisselberg's handwritten notes?
Yes.
And does that make up the 130,000 made to Keith Davidson and the 50,000 paid to Red Finch?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the next line down, which reads 180,000 times 2 for taxes, correct?
Yes.
What does times 2 for taxes refer to?
That was Alan just talking to me, telling me what he wanted to do. He wanted to double the 180,000 for taxes, so I just wrote the times 2 for taxes.
And you told me before that if a Trump Organization employee submitted an invoice for an expense reimbursement for $100, that employee would typically expect to get $100 back, right?
Yes.
And in this case, Mr. Cohen was receiving $360,000 back on a $180,000 expense?
I'm sorry, ask me that again?
Does that show that Mr. Cohen was receiving $360,000 back on a $180,000 expense?
Yes.
Were you aware of another expense reimbursement where a payment was doubled for taxes?
No.
Your notes then go on to add up the totals and sum them up to $410,000, is that right?
Yeah.
And you then wrote, use $420, right?
Yes.
Can you please explain that again?
That's when I told Alan what I came up with. He said, no, use 420.
And do you understand that to be the sum of those figures using the correct amount for the bonus?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the part of your notes where you wrote, wire monthly from DJT.
Yes.
What is the DJT a reference to?
That was a reference to President Trump's personal bank account.
And that was the MDS code for Mr. Trump's personal account?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the part of the note that reads, Mike to invoice us. Is Mike Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And what did you understand Mike to invoice us to mean?
If Michael wanted to get paid, he had to send us an invoice.
And is that based on the processes we discussed? Was that typical that someone would have to invoice the Trump organization for any expense reimbursement?
Yes.
After the discussions, the conversations you had with Mr. Weisselberg that we spoke about, did there come a time that you were in touch directly with Mr. Cohen about processing the payments?
Yeah.
Display Peoples 39 in evidence. Do you recognize this message?
Yes.
What is it?
It's an email to Michael Cohen from me just reminding us to get us invoices or an invoice.
What is the date on the message that you sent?
February 6th, 2017.
Was this shortly after your conversation with Mr. Weisselberg in January 2017?
Yes.
What is the subject line on the email from you to Mr. Cohen?
It was $2 signs.
Please read your message to Mr. Cohen.
Mike, just a reminder to get me the invoice you spoke to Alan, meaning Alan Weisselberg that you spoke to Alan about.
What were the invoices that you were referring to in this email message?
Going back to my handwritten notes, I was expecting invoices. Alan probably called me and said, get the invoices from Michael. So I sent Michael an email to send us the invoices, or at least an invoice for that month.
Can we display just for the witness, the court, and counsel, Peoples 37A? Do you recognize this message?
Yes.
What do you recognize it to be?
It's an email. Well, it is a series of emails, starting on the bottom to Alan Weisselberg from myself, and then Alan Weisselberg replies to it. And then I forward an email or send an email to Deborah Tarasoff.
And this was one of the emails that we talked about that was on the thumb drive that you reviewed, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, I offer 37A into evidence.
Objection.
Please approach.
At sidebar.
Yes, Mr. Bove?
Thank you, Judge. This is an email that we would present as an example of the embedded hearsay issue. And there are a couple of messages from Cohen on this thread that we object to coming in on the Business Records Foundation. There has to be some other basis for their admissibility. To the extent they're not being offered for their truth, we would ask for a limiting instruction that makes that clear to the jury. And so I am specifically referring to the Cohen email at 7:59 a.m. and then the email invoice that he sends at 11:58 a.m. Those are factual assertions by Mr. Cohen.
Can you read it to me? Can you read to me what you believe the embedded hearsay is?
Yes, the 7:59 a.m. email of, this is an email from Mr. Cohen to the witness. It says, Jeff, sorry for the delay, and thank you for the reminder. Please have the monthly checks for January and February made payable to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, and the address is redacted. And then there is a salutation in that email, and that's one of the factual assertions.
And the other one?
And the second one, if I could just show it to Your Honor. This is the 11:58 a.m. email, and it's an exhibit which is an invoice that Cohen sends to Mr. McConney. And our objection is that this is not a business record. It's not a Trump Organization business record. At most, it's a business record of Mr. Cohen. We assume it's coming in and not being offered for its truth, and we would ask for a limiting instruction that it's being admitted, not for its truth.
So, Your Honor, as to a second one, this is the evidence of the actual business transaction. And among other things, Mr. Cohen is a co-conspirator. We have already laid that foundation. So he, setting aside that this is past business records that Mr. McConney laid the foundation for, receiving of the invoices by email and incorporating it into the Trump Organization and relying on them for Trump Organization business, makes them admissible. So this is admissible both as under the business records exception and the co-conspirator exception.
And you are not asking for any limiting instruction?
No, Your Honor, I don't think any limited instruction is appropriate.
Okay.
Your Honor, As to the 7:59 a.m. email, I would make the same argument. There is an initial request for payment. Mr. Cohen, you can tell from email context, was responding to Mr. McConney's request for an invoice. Mr. McConney will testify that he then forwarded up to say that that wasn't enough for an invoice, but it was part of the process for requesting and accepting receiving payment.
Unlike the situation that came up previously where the people were offering certain emails into evidence as business records, actually, I think there was an exception. In any event, I find that these are business records. They are co-conspirator statements. Even though this is an invoice from Mr. Cohen, part of the business records that are being kept by the Trump Organization. So your objection is overruled.
Thank you, Judge.
Sidebar concluded.
The objection is noted and overruled. These exhibits are accepted into evidence.
Please publish Exhibit 37A. And let's go to the first exhibit. Mr. McConney, do you recognize this message?
Yes.
I want to ask you a few questions about it, but first let me ask. Have you ever seen an email message printed out like this before, with a series of messages one after the other?
Yes.
Do you have an understanding that messages may appear in reverse chronological order, with the most recent message on the top or on the first page, and the older message following or below the first messages?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the bottom of page 3, going on to the top of page 4. And if we could have that displayed and zoomed in if that's possible. Thank you. Can you read that message, please?
Just a reminder to get me the invoice you spoke to Alan about. Thanks, Jeff.
Does that appear to be the same message that we just discussed where you emailed Mr. Cohen on February 6th?
I believe so, yes.
Looking just above that message, what does the next message show?
It's an email from Michael. Jeff, sorry for the delay and thank you for the reminder. Please have the monthly checks for January and February made payable to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, and sent to hope you are well and see you soon.
And directing your attention to the next message just above that. Can you read out loud your response to Mr. Cohen?
Mike, please send me invoices so I can have the checks cut.
Why did you ask for his invoices?
I need an invoice to get a check cut or wire released.
So the email he had sent you in response to your first message, that was not sufficient for you to cut a check?
No, a lot of people ask for money. I need an invoice. Laughter in the courtroom.
Okay. Let's take a look at the next message in the chain, and can you read his response, please?
Jeff, please remind me of the monthly amount.
And let's look at the next message. Your response? $35,000 per month. And when did you send that message?
February 14th at 10:34 a.m.
And how did Mr. Cohen respond to that message?
He typed an invoice into his response email, which was basically an email from Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, dated February 14th. Do you want me to read the whole thing, or?
Please do.
Dated February 14th, 2017, it says, Invoice. It's addressed to Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the months of January and February 2017. January 2017, $35,000. February 2017, $35,000. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
Did you consider this sufficient to serve as an invoice to process these payments?
As long as it got approved, yes.
Did you ever see a retainer agreement?
I did not.
Let's go to the first page of this exhibit. And can you tell us what happened next in this series of communications?
This is the page after the one we just looked at?
Correct.
Yes. February 14th. I sent an email to Alan Weisselberg on February 14th at 2 p.m. Alan, please approve the below invoice for payment. Thanks, Jeff.
And let me direct your attention to the next message, right above that one. How did Mr. Weisselberg respond?
Okay. Okay to pay as per agreement with Don and Eric.
Who did you understand Don to refer to?
Donald J. Trump, Jr.
And who did you understand Eric to refer to?
Eric Trump.
I think you testified earlier. Were Don and Eric the trustees of the trust at the time?
Yes.
And were Don and Eric both approved signers for checks the trust at the time?
I believe so, yes.
What was their role in approving invoices at the time?
They owned the company. They could approve any invoice they wanted to. I'm sorry, they didn't own the company. They were running the company. They were entitled or were allowed to approve any invoice they wanted.
Did you send this invoice to the legal department?
No.
Was it typical for the legal department to review requests for legal payment?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the top message in the chain. Can you tell me what that is?
I forward Alan's, did we go through Alan's approval? Yes, I forwarded Alan's approval on the other email to Deb Tarasoff, accounts payable, and asked, please pay from the trust, meaning Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust, total expenses for the total amount. Use that account for any payment, otherwise it just won't go anywhere. Put in quotes the retainer for the months of January and February 2017 in the description. And then there is a description, which is a piece of input data, so that we put that so that it would describe what you are paying.
When you described earlier your handwritten notes, you wrote down pay monthly from DJT, correct?
Yes.
And that was to indicate that the expenses were to be paid from the DJT personal account. Is that right?
Yes.
That account is different than the trust account?
Yes.
Why in this email did you ask Ms. Tarasoff to pay to make this payment from the trust account instead of from the DJT account?
At that point in time, we were paying the president's personal expenses instead of from the DJT personal account, from the DJ Trust account. The DJT Trust account.
Now, your email asks Ms. Tarasoff to post the legal expenses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please explain what you meant by post the legal expenses.
Whenever you make a payment, you have to choose how it's going to be indicated in the general ledger category, how to put the payment, where to post the payment to. So when you print the general ledger, it summarizes the expenses in that account. There are a number of accounts you can post it to. We were paying a lawyer, so I said to posted it to legal expenses in the general ledger.
What is the general ledger code for legal expenses?
51505.
And in the next sentence, you said, put retainer for the months of January and February 2017 in the description, right?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I was just taking some information from the invoice, so Deb would know what to put in multi-data and in MDS. And that part of the information prints on the general ledger when you print the general ledger.
And once that description is in the general ledger system, who can see it?
Anybody who looks in the general ledger.
I'm sorry.
You can look on the screen. You can run a report. If I run a report, anybody that gets the report can see it.
And did the Trump Organization's outside accountants also have access to those descriptions?
When we printed the general ledger for them, yes. They didn't have access to our general ledger package. We had to print reports for them and get them reports of documents.
And why did you print out reports and give them to the accountants?
Usually, most of the time, it was for tax purposes, to prepare a tax return or a financial statement.
Did you expect that they would review this expense account at the end of the year for tax purposes?
Yes, this is one of the accountants that we went over this with, Donald Bender and myself. Donald Bender is one of the partners of Mazars, who oversaw the account expenses from the Trump accounts.
Did you know that outside accountants would review this and that those outside accountants would have access to this information?
Yes.
Is one of the reasons for putting this information in the general ledger for when the outside accountants who had access to these descriptions, in order to understand the description of legal fees as information that the accountants would need to prepare tax returns or financial statements?
Yes, and part of the conversation, it would start a conversation if they needed more information.
After submitting and getting approval on this invoice labeled the request for payment for January and February 2017, did Mr. Cohen submit other invoices?
Yes.
To your recollection, did he submit one invoice each month after that in 2017?
For calendar year 2017, yes.
Your Honor, I offer into evidence People's 37B.
Same objection as noted previously.
Same objection, same response from the people?
Yes, Your Honor.
37B is accepted into evidence.
Please display 37B publicly. Mr. McConney, do you have 37B on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's from the bottom going up. It's an email from Michael Cohen to myself and Alan Weisselberg. It was an invoice for the month of March.
What's the date on this email?
February 16th, 2017.
I'm sorry, is that the date on the email itself?
Oh, I'm sorry. The date of the email was Thursday, March 16th, 2017 at 11:58 a.m.
Can you read out loud the message beginning with, Dear Alan?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of March 2017.
And what does it say below that?
March 2017, $35,000.
And take a look at the top of the page, page 1 now, please, and tell us what it shows.
At the top is an email from myself to Alan on March 16th. Okay, it was sent to Alan and Deb. Deb, please pay post to same GL as last month.
What does GL mean?
That's accountant speak for general ledger.
And what did you mean by post the same GL as last month?
Basically, whatever I told you last month, post it to legal fees, put the description in, just follow the same pattern routine.
So you were asking Ms. Tarasoff to post this to legal expenses?
Yes.
Did there come a time when you switched from using the trust account to using the DJT account to pay the invoices from Mr. Cohen.
Yes.
And you previously told us that Mr. Trump was the only signatory on checks cut from the DJT account. Is that right?
That's correct.
Where was he located in 2017?
Washington, D.C.
So, when you switched and started paying Mr. Cohen's reimbursement checks from the DJT accounts instead of the trust account, what did that mean in terms of getting the check signed?
Somehow, we would have to get a package down to the White House, get it to the president, get the president to sign the checks, get the checks returned to us, and then have the checks mailed out. A whole new process for us.
And is that because the signatures for the trust account were located in New York?
I'm sorry, yes.
Can we display People's 40 in evidence? Mr. McConney, do you have that on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this email?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
On the bottom, it starts with an email from Michael Cohen to me. Read it.
Please do.
Did you receive the invoice from me for March? Thanks and hope all is well.
And what's the date of this email?
March 28th, 2017.
And let's go up in this exhibit. And can you please read your response?
Okay. Yes, I'll check status tomorrow. DJT needs to sign check.
What did you mean by DJT needs to sign check?
Well, the check was drawn out of President Trump's personal account. We had to get it down to the White House for the president to sign it.
So this was around the time that you switched from using the trust account to the DJT account? I believe so, yes. I offer People's 37C into evidence.
Judge, we will have the same objection to each exhibit in the 37 series.
And the people will have the same response?
Yes, Your Honor.
Your objection is noted and overruled. 37C is accepted into evidence.
Mr. McConney, do you have that document in front of you on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
That's an email. Well, it's a series of emails to Michael and Alan and myself and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's go to the third page, please. Can you describe this document?
This looks like an invoice from Michael Cohen, looking for payment for the month of April 2017 in the amount of $35,000.
Was this invoice attached to the email we just looked at?
Can you take this off the screen and just so I can see the email?
Yes. Can we go back to this one, please?
Yes, it says attachments MDCPC April. That should be the invoice that was attached to the email.
Thank you. Can we go back to page 3, please? Displayed. And can you read the invoice starting below the date?
It's addressed to Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of April 2017. April 2017, $35,000. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
Now let's go back to the first page of this document. And can we start at the bottom part of the message and please let us know what this shows?
It's an email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg. It says, Alan, happy holiday. I'm attaching the April invoice for processing. Thank you.
What's the date of the email on Mr. Cohen to Mr. Weisselberg?
April 13th, 2017.
And let's go to the next message in the chain just above that. And can you zoom out a little bit more just so we can see what comes below that as well? What does this show?
Okay, so we've got the email from Michael to Alan. The second one was an email on Thursday, April 13th, 2017, from Alan to myself.
So Mr. Weisselberg forwarded to you Mr. Cohen's email and invoice, is that right?
Yes.
Did he include any message in the email?
No.
Let's go up from there. And please display the top message. Can you please tell the jury what this shows?
It's an email from myself and somebody else. I'm assuming that's Alan's email to Deb Tarasoff. And it says, please pay.
What's the date of that email?
April 13th, 2017.
Did you understand from Mr. Weisselberg's forward to you that the invoice was approved to pay?
Yes.
Let's take that down. Your Honor, I offer into evidence 37D through 37K.
Your objection is noted. Overruled. Those exhibits are accepted into evidence.
Please display 37D. Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deb Tarasoff.
Does the email indicate whether there is an attachment? The one from to Deb from me does have an attachment. I don't know if the other ones did or didn't. I don't know how to tell. Let's display the second page of this exhibit. Can you describe this document?
It's an invoice from Michael Cohen for the month of May 2017.
Can you read the text of the invoice below the date?
Mr. Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of May 2017. May 2017, $35,000. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
Now let's go back to the first page of this document. And directing your attention to the first message on the bottom of the page. What does this show?
It's an email from Michael to Alan Weisselberg.
What is the date of Mr. Cohen's email to Mr. Weisselberg?
May 22nd, 2017.
What's the subject?
May invoice.
Please read the message.
Alan, hope all is well. Please find attached the May invoice. Also, please call me to discuss the last Open Foundation matter. Thank you.
Let's go up in this correspondence and show the rest of the email above that, if we can. Starting the middle and moving up. Please tell us what this shows.
This is an email from Alan Weisselberg to me, which is basically forwarding Michael's email. Then I forward all of those other emails to Deb Tarasoff and ask her to please pay the invoice.
Thank you. Please publish People's 37E. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
A series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg with myself, and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's go to the second page, please. What does this show?
This is an email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg on June 16th, 2017.
And please read the message starting with, Dear Alan.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of May 2017 and June 2017, May 2017, $35,000. June 2017, $35,000. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Thank you. And just above that message, can you take a look and let us know what happened next?
Alan Weisselberg forwarded me the email he received from Michael Cohen.
And let's go to the top of the page. Can you describe that message and read it out loud, please?
I then forward that email being Alan Weisselberg's email, to Deb Tarasoff. I said, Deb, please pay June and put a stop on the April 13th, 2017 check number 2639 cut out of DJT and replace it. Any questions, please call me. Thanks.
Why did you ask Ms. Tarasoff to put a stop on the check?
Michael was waiting for payment for one of his months, and it looks like we never got a check back from the White House, so we stopped it and reissued it.
So is it correct that the original April check for the April payment was lost?
Yes, it was lost. Somebody couldn't find it. I guess it was the same as lost. Lost.
Please display People's 37F. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's an email or a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Let's take a look at the second page. Can you describe this, please?
That's an invoice from Michael Cohen for the month of July 2017.
And please read what the invoice reads below the date.
Invoice. Mr. Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of July 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen. Michael.
Does this invoice include a specific amount to be paid?
It does not.
Did you have an understanding as to the specific amount to be paid?
I did.
What was that understanding?
$35,000.
And what was that understanding based on?
Based on the prior invoices and the notes that I took in Alan's office.
Turning back to the first page, what is the message on the bottom of that page?
The email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg. Dear Alan, hope you are well and getting a chance to enjoy the summer despite all of the nonsense. Speak soon.
And what's the date and time of that email?
Tuesday, July 11th, 2017, 9:35 a.m.
Let's look above that. And please tell us what the message is right above.
There is no message. Just Alan forwards to me Michael's email.
Did you understand that to be approval to pay?
Yes.
And what's the message at the top of this page?
Then I, in turn, forwarded the below emails and the invoice to Deb Tarasoff and asked her to pay.
What's the date of your email to Ms. Tarasoff?
July 11th, 2017.
And when you forwarded this email to Ms. Tarasoff, what amount did you have an understanding that she would pay?
$35,000.
Please display People's 37G. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, and myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
And take a look at the bottom of the page, please. Bottom of the first page, and please describe.
It's an email from Michael on August 2017 to Alan Weisselberg.
What does Mr. Cohen's email say?
Alan, hope all is well and you get a chance to enjoy part of the summer. See you soon. Yours, Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump. You have the address as 30 Rockefeller Plaza, 23rd floor, New York, New York.
Let's take a look at the second page. What do you recognize this to be?
This is an invoice from Michael Cohen for the month of August 2017.
And starting below the address, what does the read?
August before, after the address. Okay. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of August 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Does this invoice indicate an amount?
It does not.
Did you have the same understanding as to the amount requested?
Yes.
And what was that based on?
Prior month's invoices and the conversation that I had with Alan in his office in January.
Now let's go back to the first page and immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen to Mr. Weisselberg.
Alan forwarded Michael Cohen's email to me.
Was there a message in his forward?
There was not.
Did you understand that to be approval to pay?
Yes.
Let's go to the top of the page, and please describe.
It's an email to Deb from me. I forwarded Michael's and Alan's emails, Michael's invoice to Deb Tarasoff, and asked her to please pay the attached invoice.
What's the date that you forwarded that email?
August 1st, 2017.
And again, did you have an amount in mind that Tarasoff would pay?
Yes.
What amount was that?
$35,000.
Is that based on the same understanding?
Yes.
Let's display People's 37H. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a series of emails from Michael Cohen, but between and among Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deb Tarasoff.
Let's turn to the second page. What is this document?
It's an invoice from Michael Cohen for the months of August and September.
What's the date on this invoice?
September 11th, 2017.
And can you read the address and message, please?
It's Mr. Alan Weisselberg, care of Donald J. Trump, 725 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10022. Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the months of August and September 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Does this invoice include an amount?
It does not.
Did you have an understanding as to the amount being requested?
Yes.
What was that amount?
$35,000.
What was that understanding based on?
Based on prior invoices and my conversation with Alan in January.
Let's go back to the first page. And let's look at the bottom of the first page. And can you describe that message?
It's an email from Michael to Alan Weisselberg, September 11th, 2017. Alan, hope you are holding up and not damaged by the hurricane to your Florida home. Be well. Yours, Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, 23rd floor, New York, New York, 10112.
And turning immediately above that message, can you please describe what happened next in the communication?
Alan forwarded to me Michael's email and invoice.
And what's the date of that forward?
September 11th, 2017.
Did you understand by this email that Mr. Weisselberg had approved payment on this invoice?
Yes.
Let's look at the next message above that. Please describe this message.
I forwarded the email from Alan to Deborah Tarasoff on September 11th, 2017, without any message.
In forwarding the email and invoice in the email chain to Ms. Tarasoff without any email message, did you intend for her to pay the invoice?
Yes.
Please display People's 37I. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Take a look at the bottom of the first page, please, and describe this message.
The email is from Michael to Alan Weisselberg, and the message is, hope you are well.
What's the date of that email before we move on?
October 18th, 2017.
Okay. Let's turn to the third page, please. What is this document?
It's an invoice from Michael Cohen.
And what's the date on that invoice?
October 18th, 2017.
What does the invoice read?
Just the body of the whole thing.
Why don't you just read the body this time?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of October 2017.
Let's go back to the first page, please. And immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg, can you describe what happens next in the communication?
Alan forwards Michael's email to me.
On what date?
October 18th, 2017.
And in forwarding you the email and invoice, did you understand that to be Mr. Weisselberg's approval to pay?
Yes.
Let's look at the next message above that. And what is this message?
This is an email to Deb Tarasoff from me asking Deb to please pay.
What's the date of your email to Ms. Tarasoff?
October 18th, 2017.
Let's look at, can we display People's 37J? Do you have that on your screen, Mr. McConney?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Okay. Let's go to the bottom of the first page, please. And can you describe this message?
The message, Alan, happy Thanksgiving and hope all is going well.
Who is it from and to?
It's from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg.
And what date?
November 20th, 2017.
Let's turn to the third page, please. What is this document?
This is an invoice from Michael Cohen.
What's the date of the invoice?
November 20th, 17.
And please read the invoice language.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of November 2017.
Does this invoice include the amount that's requested?
It does not.
Did you have an understanding as to the amount that was being requested?
Yes.
What was that amount?
Based on prior invoices and my conversation with Alan in January.
And what did you understand the amount to be?
$35,000.
Let's turn back to the first page. And immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen to Mr. Weisselberg, can you describe the next message in the communication?
It's an email from Alan Weisselberg to myself on November 20th, 2017.
Is there any language in the body of the email other than Mr. Weisselberg's signature block?
No.
In forwarding you the email from Mr. Cohen and the invoice, did you understand Mr. Weisselberg to approve payment on the invoice?
Yes.
Please look at the top of the page and describe the next message in the communication.
It's an email to Deb Tarasoff from myself on November 20th, 2017.
And what does your email to Ms. Tarasoff say?
Deb, please pay the attached invoice.
Let's take that down. And can you please display People's 37K? What is this?
It's a series of emails between Michael Cohen, Alan Weisselberg, myself, and Deborah Tarasoff.
Let's look at the bottom of the first page of this document, please. Can you read us that message?
It's an email from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg, December 2017. Alan, I want to wish you a happy holiday and hope all is well.
Thank you. Let's turn to the third page, please. What is this?
That's Michael Cohen's invoice.
What's the date on the invoice?
December 1st, 2017.
And please read the language on the invoice.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of December 2017.
And turning back to the first page, immediately above the email from Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg, can you describe what happened next in the communication?
Alan Weisselberg forwarded Michael's email to me on December 1st, 2017.
Other than Mr. Weisselberg's Trump Organization signature block, is there any other language in the message that got on that forward?
There is not.
In sending you the email and invoice from Mr. Cohen for December, did you understand Mr. Weisselberg to be approving payment on that invoice?
Yes.
If you remember, and I can show you if you don't, did the invoice that you looked at on page 3 include an amount requested?
It did not.
What did you understand the amount requested to be?
$35,000.
And what was the basis of your understanding?
Prior invoices from Michael and my conversation or meeting with Alan in January of 2017.
Okay, now looking at the top of this first page, can you describe your next message in the communication?
I forward Alan's and Michael's emails to Deb Tarasoff on December 1st, 2017.
Is the series of invoices that we just discussed consistent with the 35,000 monthly payments reflected in the handwritten notes that you took in January 2017?
Yes.
And do these invoices for 12 payments of 35,000 total 420,000?
Yes.
Did you ever direct Ms. Tarasoff to make any further 35,000 payments to Mr. Cohen?
Not that I remember, no.
Did you ever see any other invoices from Mr. Cohen?
Not that I remember.
So, did the payments stop in December 2017 after the December 1st invoice we just saw?
Yes, I believe so.
And so far as you understood, did these payments satisfy the obligation that you discussed with Mr. Weisselberg in January of 2017?
They paid the same dollar amount as was on that statement in my notes, yes.
Okay. Let's display People's 45 in evidence, unless Your Honor suggests that now is a good time for a break.
Is this a good time to take a break?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, jurors, let's take our mid-morning recess. You can step out.
Please leave your books on the chair. All rise.
You may be seated, sir. You may step down.
Witness excused.
Mr. Bove, it appeared that you were about to say something before we broke. Did you want to go on the record with anything?
No, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, enjoy your break.
Thank you.
Remain seated. Come to order. Part 59 is back in session.
Let's get Mr. McConney, please.
Witness entering.
Let's get the jury, please. Mr. McConney, you're still under oath.
All rise. Jury entering. Whereupon the jury entered the courtroom and was properly seated.
Please be seated.
Case on trial continued. Will the parties stipulate that all jurors are present and properly seated?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Colangelo.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning again, Mr. McConney.
Good morning, sir.
Just before the break, we were discussing the invoices for payments that totaled $420,000 in 2017. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes, sir.
Can I display for the witness, the court, and the parties only People's 45? Do you recognize this as one of the documents on the thumb drive you reviewed?
Yes, sir.
What is this document?
It is one of the reports we can run from the MDS accounts payable system.
Is there any handwriting on this document?
Yes, there is.
Do you recognize whose handwriting it is?
I do.
Whose handwriting is it?
Deborah Tarasoff.
I offer People's 45 in evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Let's publish that document, please. Mr. McConney, can you describe what this document is?
It's called a query voucher. It's a report that is run for a specific vendor. In this case, it's run for any entity that pays this specific vendor. Any check that was paid during the period January 1st, 2017 to January 5th, 2018. It includes various information, voucher number, which is a tracking system, the company it was paid from, the vendor's name, a small description of what the invoice was for. The status, you can run it if the invoice was paid or unpaid. You can void it, or you can run multiple options. The date of the invoice amount, the date paid, check number, and a due date, which I think is an automatically generated date.
You mentioned that this report can show payments made to a particular vendor. Is that right?
Yes.
Who is the vendor in this instance?
Michael D. Cohen, Esquire.
Who printed this document?
I don't know.
You said before that you recognized the handwriting on the right-hand side?
The handwriting, I assume she wrote it, but I don't know if she did.
By she, you are referring to Deborah Tarasoff?
Yes, she is the only person in accounts payable, so I figure she ran it. I don't know 100%.
Can you describe the first column, please?
It says voucher number.
And what is a voucher number?
When you are sending or the software puts an invoice up or into the accounts payable system, it creates a voucher, and an invoice number is automatically assigned by Multidata MDS.
Describe the second column, please.
Comp, which is short for company, that would be the company that paid the invoice.
And which company does appear in the comp column on this query voucher summary?
DJT Rev, it stands for Donald J. Trump. Revocable Trust, and DJT is President Trump personally.
And does DJT Rev and DJT indicate the entity that issued a given payment?
Yes.
Across the top, does this document show a range for the date paid?
Yes.
And what is that range?
These are for checks that were cut and issued between, from, and including January 1st, 2017 through and including January 5th of 2018.
So is this a report that was run on January 5th, 2018 to identify all payments to Michael D. Cohen, Esquire in 2017?
That's what I don't know if that's the purpose, but that's what it does reflect.
What does the handwriting on the top write sum up, if anything?
That's the total of the first three payments which were paid out of the DJT Revocable Trust or the President's Trust.
What's the total amount?
$105,000.
Do you see the handwriting below that on the right-hand side?
Yes.
What does that handwriting show?
$315,000.
Do you have an understanding of what that denotes? Do you have an understanding of what that $315,000 refers to?
That's the total of the checks that were cut out of the president's personal bank account.
And is that also the total of the checks that were cut from DJT as an entity?
I am sorry, the DJT account, yes.
And does the bottom of this report display the total amount that was paid in 2017?
Yes.
What is that total?
$420,000.
You testified earlier that MDS can run reports for certain expenses in a given account. Is that right?
I am sorry. Can you ask that again?
Can MDS run reports showing payments that were posted to a particular expense code for a given expense?
Yes, I mean, given an account with an expense code is the same thing in my world, in my language.
Let me ask that question differently then. Can MDS run a report showing certain expense types that were paid from a given entity?
Yes.
So could it run a report showing everything booked to the account for legal expenses for a given entity and year?
Yes.
Please display only for the court, the witness and parties, People's 54. Mr. McConney, let me know when you have it on your screen.
I have it on the screen.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Is this one of the documents that was on the thumb drive?
Yes.
What is this document?
This is a detailed general ledger report from MDS.
And what's the entity that the detailed general ledger report relates to?
It is the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
I offer People's 54 in evidence.
Objection.
Approach.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Your Honor, as far as I can tell, Government Exhibit 54 relates to a period from 2018 forward. If that's correct, we don't see the relevance of those entries in this case.
Your Honor, People's 54 is an extract from the general ledger for the Revocable Trust account that shows all payments made, coded to the legal expense code. The relevance is that there are no payments to Michael Cohen, Esquire, from the trust account for 2018 that were coded to 51505.
Okay, I will allow it.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Is People's 54 in evidence?
Yes, it is.
Can we publish People's 54? Mr. McConney, I think you said this is a withdrawn. What is this document?
It's a detailed general ledger report that is printed out on the MDS.
And take a look at the upper left-hand corner of page 1. What's the company name?
DJT Rev.
Which entity does this relate to?
The Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
What's the time period?
It's for transactions during the period January 1st, 2018 through December 31st, 2018, calendar year 2018.
Let's turn to the second page of this document. and let me direct your attention to the bottom of the page. What's the last account code listed on the page?
The account code is 51505.
What does that account code respond to?
Legal expenses.
Did you testify that you reviewed this document earlier?
Yeah.
What does the rest of the document show?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Let's take this down and go to page 3. Can you tell us what page 3 shows?
They are expenses or payments that were posted to account 51505, legal expense.
Does it show them in a particular order?
They are in date order.
Let's display page 4. What does this page show?
The same thing, the legal expenses posted to account 51505.
And is that from the DJT Rev entity?
Yes, so it's still part of the DJT General Ledger.
For 2018?
This is for part of 2018, yes.
Let's advance to the next page. What does this show?
The top of the page shows postings to account 51505, legal expense postings for payments. In the bottom, we start a new general ledger account, 51506, which are payments to an expense account called Accounting and Auditing, payments to accountants.
And have you reviewed the entries in the legal expense code on this exhibit?
Yes.
Does that show all of the charges to the account for legal expenses for the trust account in 2018?
Yes.
Were there any payments to Michael Cohen from that account in 2018 that was billed to legal expense?
No.
Let's display, just for the witness, the court and parties. People's 55. Please let me know, Mr. McConney, when you have it on your screen.
It's on my screen.
Do you recognize this?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It is a detailed general ledger printed from MDS.
What's the company identified in the upper left-hand corner?
DJT.
And what's the time period for this report?
Calendar year 2008.
Is this one of the documents that you reviewed from the thumb drive we discussed earlier?
Yes, it is.
I offer People's 55 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Let's start on the first page, Mr. McConney. Please go ahead and tell the jury what this is.
It's a detailed general ledger printout for MDS.
What's the date of the transactions that it reports?
Calendar year 2018.
Take a look at the upper left-hand corner. Is this a report from the general ledger for the DJT account?
Yes, his personal account.
Let's turn to the second page. Now I will direct your attention to the bottom of the page. Does this show entries for legal expenses in 2018?
This paragraph shows, yes, this page shows one entry to account 51505 legal expense.
What's the date of that entry?
January 2nd, 2018.
Please advance to the next page. And Mr. McConney, please review that page and let me know when you have had a chance to look it over.
I looked it over.
What do these show?
These are continuing reports for the legal expense account for 51505 for 2018.
Can you advance to the next page? Is this a continuing report for legal expense for 2018 from the DJT account?
Yes, it is.
Please advance to the next page. And can you let us know what that is?
It is a continuation payment posted to expenses in 2018 for account 51505.
Please advance to the next page. And what is this?
More legal expenses posted to legal expense account 51505 for 2018.
Have you had an opportunity to review each page of this exhibit?
Yes.
Does this document show all of the charges to the account for legal expenses for the DJT entity in 2018?
Yes.
Were there any payments to Michael Cohen from the DJT account in 2018 that were billed to legal expenses?
No.
Mr. McConney, we can go ahead and take that down. And can we display People's 43 in evidence? Mr. McConney, do you see People's 43?
I do.
Do you recognize this document?
I do.
Can you tell the jury what it is?
It is a detailed general ledger report from MDS.
What company and year?
The company is DJT Rev for calendar years 2017 and 2018.
And does this show the 3 payments to Michael Cohen from the trust account in response to the approved invoices discussed for January, February, and March 2017?
Yes.
And does this show what account those payments were coded to?
Yes.
Does this record the description of a retainer for each payment?
Yes.
What's the total amount of the payments that were paid from the trust account?
$105,000.
Let's display People's 44 in evidence. Do you have that on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Do you recognize that document?
Yes, sir.
What is this document?
It is a detailed general ledger report from MDS.
Does that show payments from the DJT entity?
Yes.
And where do you see that?
In the upper left-hand corner, a company named DJT.
So is this the same kind of a report that we just looked at? This is for a company named DJT, and the last one was for a company named DJT Rev.
That's correct.
Does it show payments to Michael Cohen from a company named DJT in response to the approved invoices we just discussed for the months from April to December of 2017?
Yeah.
And what account code were they coded to?
Legal expense 51505.
Does this record the description of a retainer for each payment?
Yes.
What's the total of the payments that were paid from the company named DJT?
This is $315,000.
Thank you. We can take that down. Mr. McConney, are you familiar with a tax form called a 1099?
Yes.
What's a 1099?
There are various types of 1099-S. You get 1099-S from banks for savings account for interest. You get them from brokerage accounts for dividends. Non-employees get a 1099 miscellaneous. There are a number of 1099-S that can be issued for various reasons.
Did part of your responsibilities as controller of the Trump Organization include overseeing the preparation of 1099-S?
Yes.
How are 1099-S generated?
If the checks were issued from MDS, there is a program in MDS that would literally issue 1099 forms or print the 1099 form, and we can just make them out and send them to the company.
What did the Trump Organization do with the 1099-S after preparing them?
We filed them away in our tax file or files.
Did you send them to anybody else?
We sent one copy to the individual or the entity that the 1099 was for, and a copy to the Internal Revenue Service.
Can we display People's 93 just for the court, the witness, and counsel? Mr. McConney, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It is a 1099 for 2017, 1099 miscellaneous for 2017.
Directing your attention to the box at the top left, who is the payer?
Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
Is this an example of a 1099 that you just described preparing?
Yes.
I offer People's 93 in evidence.
No objection.
Exhibit 93 is accepted into evidence.
Mr. McConney, please take a look at People's 93. And again, let's highlight the payer's name, and please tell the jury who is the payer.
The payer, Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust.
And address your attention to the box holding recipient's name. Who is the recipient?
Michael D. Cohen, Esquire.
And to the right of that box, in box 7, what is that box labeled?
Non-employee compensation.
What's the amount?
$105,000.
What do you understand that $105,000 to reflect?
Those were payments made to Michael Cohen during calendar year 2017.
And were those payments made to Mr. Cohen during calendar year 2017 from the trust?
These were from the trust, yes.
Let's turn to the second page. Does this show a second form 1099 Missy?
Yes.
And what is the year?
2017.
Who is the payer for this 1099?
Donald J. Trump.
Who is the recipient?
Michael D. Cohen, Esquire.
And take a look at box number 7. Let us know again what box number 7 reports.
Non-employee compensation.
What's the amount recorded in box 7?
$315,000.
What do you understand that $315,000 to reflect?
Those were payments made out of the DJT account to Michael Cohen for calendar year 2017.
And what's the total amount reflected in the two 1099-S?
$420,000.
So are these the 1099-S that the Trump Organization issued to Mr. Cohen to reflect the $420,000 payments that Mr. Cohen received in 2017?
Yes.
And you testified earlier that these 1099-S go both to the payer and to the Federal Internal Revenue Service?
Recipient and the Internal Revenue Service.
Thank you. You can take that exhibit down. Mr. McConney, are you familiar with a federal agency called the Office of Government Ethics?
Yes, I am.
Is that agency sometimes referred to as OGE?
Yes.
Did your responsibilities when you worked at the Trump Organization include helping to prepare an annual financial disclosure report for Mr. Trump to be submitted to the Office of Government Ethics?
Yeah.
Did you have a name for that annual financial disclosure report?
We used to call it by the form number. It was 278E as in Edward.
Can you describe what the form 278E is?
It is a filing. It's what's called a conflict of interest form that the government requires certain individuals to file annually. Semi-annually. I am not too sure of other reports, but the president had to file this form annually.
Did he file it both when he was a candidate for presidency and as president?
We filed reports from when he declared his candidacy in 2015 until when he left office in 2017. He is a candidate now. I am not there, so I don't know if he filed anything.
During your time at the Trump Organization, did you work on the form 278E before Mr. Trump became president?
Yes.
What kinds of financial interests are required to be disclosed on the Office of Government Ethics Form 278E?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
You mentioned, Mr. McConney, that the 278B is a conflicts disclosure form?
Conflicts of interest, yes.
What kinds of information are collected and reported on that form?
There is a schedule that lists all the entities you belong to, your position in those entities, I believe the date you acquire that position or interest in the company, the date you disposed of it. listing of your assets, the value of the assets, location of the assets, the income for that assets. I think there were retirement funds, retirement payments, your spouse's assets, your stock holdings, bond holdings, bank accounts, liabilities. I think gifts, I think that's most of the major, if not all of them.
What was your role in preparing the report when you worked at the Trump Organization?
The first time I was involved with something, we went through the whole document from A to Z. Since it took so long, at one point we were up at 4 o'clock in the morning just filing the document. That may be normal for you, but not normal for my life. So we kind of split it up. So I took care of a few pieces of the form and someone else took care of the rest of the form.
Which aspects of the form did you take care of later in the process?
I took care of Mrs. Trump's assets, stock holdings, stock transactions, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, liabilities. I think that's it.
Did you help prepare Mr. Trump and then President Trump's submission to the Office of Government Ethics? For each year, Mr. Trump was a candidate or a federal official while you still worked there?
Yes, I filed it through or helped file it through January of 2017.
Please display for the witness, the court, and parties the documents marked for identification as People's 81. And Mr. McConney, please let me know when you have that on your screen.
It's here.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
This is a 278B.
Is this the first page of that document?
Yes, it is.
So is this a copy of the annual financial disclosure report of the kind you helped prepare?
Yes.
Is this the signed, a certified annual report for year 2017?
Yes.
Did you help prepare this document?
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to review each page of People's 81 before testifying?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of the signed and certified annual report for President Trump for the year 2017?
I believe so, yes.
I offer People's 81 into evidence.
Objection.
Please approach.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Thank you, Judge. My first objection to this exhibit is based on the presidential media argument we made. This is a document that President Trump signed in 2018 as President of the United States. And so we believe it is an official act that should not come into evidence at the trial.
Okay.
So for the same reasons I believe we briefed and argued previously, there is no evidentiary inadmissibility doctrine for official acts. And in any event, the regulations require the filing of the OGE Form 278 for presidential candidates, candidates for federal office and federal officials, for reasons including for the purpose of ensuring compliance with the federal conflict of interest law. It is not a document entitled to any evidentiary exclusion at all.
I agree.
The second objection is that there are parts of this disclosure form that appear to be based on business records that the witness is familiar with. There are other factual assertions in here that I don't know he laid a foundation for, including factual foundations or governmental official offices adopting the form on the first page. I don't think that can come in as a business record. I don't think, as proffered right now as a business record, it can come in.
We are admitting this to show, or offering this into evidence to show, that this is a signed and certified statement by the defendant. One page, page 45 of that document, includes a footnote describing his liabilities and acknowledging that in 2016, Mr. Cohen incurred expenses on his behalf, and the defendant repaid those expenses in 2017. That is an admission.
Okay, I will let it in.
Thank you.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
Overruled. The document is accepted into evidence.
Please publish People's 81, and Max McConney, please tell the jury what this document is.
This is the president's annual filing of the non-disclosure form or conflict of interest form, which I believe is for probably the first 20 days of 2017.
Mr. McConney, let me direct your attention to the top of the first page, to the boxes in the top left corner. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Can you read out loud the report type?
Report type is annual.
And can you read out loud both the year indicator and the year?
The year is, it says, year annual report only 2017.
Do you understand this to be an annual report as opposed to a new entry report?
Yes.
Let's take a look at the middle of the first page. And can you blow up that date, please? What's the date that this was signed and certified?
May 15th, 2018.
So I think you said a minute ago that this was a report related to the first 20 days of 2017. Having looked at the report type, year, and date, do you have a different understanding?
I was going by the upper left-hand corner, which was the date. I misread it. Yes, the years, I misinterpreted the years.
Well, do you understand this to be the annual report for 2017, which was signed and certified and submitted in 2018?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you recognize the signature on that first signature line?
Yes.
Whose signature is it?
That's President Trump's signature.
How do you recognize that signature?
I have seen it many times.
And tell us again what the date is on this document.
May 15th, 2018.
Please take a look at the language just above the signature. Do you see a line that reads, Filer's Certification?
Yes.
Please read that line out loud.
I certify that the statements I have made in this report are true, complete, and correct to the best of my knowledge.
And that's Mr. Trump's signature in the certification box below that filing certification line.
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the 45th page of this document. At the top of the page, can you read what section of the submission we are in?
Part 8, Liabilities.
And can you now let me direct your attention to the language at the very bottom of that page, the language in small type. If we can zoom in, make that as large as we can, and highlight there. Mr. McConney, can you read what that line says?
Sure, in the interest of transparency, while not required to be disclosed as reportable liabilities on Part 8, in 2016, expenses were incurred by one of Donald J. Trump's attorneys, Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen sought reimbursement of those expenses, and Mr. Trump fully reimbursed Mr. Cohen in 2017. The category of value would be $100,000 to $250,000, and the interest rate would be 0.
Let me ask you a question about the category of value. In your work on the Financial Disclosure Report, this 278E form, do you have an understanding of how liabilities are required to be disclosed?
Yes.
What is that understanding?
They are reported within a range of a certain point and anything within that range.
Okay, so a filer is not required to report a specific dollar amount, but instead is required to disclose the dollar value range of a given liability. Is that right?
Well, the range that dollar amount would fall into.
Tell us again what the category of value is for the line you described.
$100,000 to $250,000.
Earlier today, you testified about your discussions with Alan Weisselberg about money that was owed to Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And you testified that the two payments owed were $130,000 for the wire to Keith Davidson and $50,000 for Redfinch Tech Services?
That's correct.
And that adds up to $180,000, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is that consistent with the disclosure on the certified government ethics form of an obligation to Michael Cohen in the range of $100,001 to $250,000 for expenses incurred in 2016?
It was a long question. Can you just repeat it again? I remember pieces of it.
Sorry. Let me back up a few seconds. You testified about discussions with Alan Weisselberg in January of 2017?
Yes.
About money that was owed to Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And the two amounts that were owed were $130,000 to Keith Davidson and $50,000 to Redfinch?
Yes.
And what is those total up to?
$180,000.
Is it consistent to the disclosure of a liability in the range of a $100,000 to $250,000?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Your witness, you may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. McConney.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I am well. My name is Emil Bove, and I represent President Trump. We haven't met before, right?
No, sir.
And you just testified about a series of payments that were made to Michael Cohen in 2017, right?
Yes, sir.
And in that time frame, 2017, Michael Cohen was a lawyer, right?
Okay.
Right?
Sure, yes.
And payments to lawyers by the Trump Organization are legal expenses, right?
Yes, sir.
And you booked those payments on the general ledger as legal expenses, correct?
Yes.
And during your 30-something plus years at the Trump Organization, you sort of rarely had conversations with President Trump, right?
Very few.
And during the instances when you did speak to him, you didn't talk about accounting software, did you?
No.
You never gave him a tour of the MD system, right?
No.
And you have no reason to believe, do you, that President Trump understood the details of MDS?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer that.
I'm sorry. Can you ask that again?
You didn't have any reason to believe that President Trump understood the details of MDS?
Correct.
And you did not talk to President Trump about the events that you just described in response to Mr. Colangelo's questions, did you?
I did not.
You did not talk to him about those events in 2016, correct?
I did not.
You did not talk to him about those events in 2017?
I did not.
And you did not talk to him about those events in 2018 either?
I did not.
Not ever, right?
No.
President Trump did not ask you to do any of the things that you just described in response to Mr. Colangelo's questions, correct?
He did not.
And as far as you know, President Trump did not ask anyone to do those things, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
I am just asking about your knowledge.
Okay, so can you ask it again?
Can't ask it again. Sorry, I just want to focus, though. My question's, too, about what you knew.
Okay.
In none of the conversations that you had with Mr. Weisselberg, did he suggest that President Trump had told him to do these things?
Alan never told me that.
And you testified about some emails that you have exchanged with Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And it seems like the bulk of those were in 2017, correct?
Yes.
You did not actually talk to Mr. Michael Cohen about any of these issues, did you?
Objection.
Overruled.
No. Talk to Michael, no.
You did not speak to him about these issues, correct?
Correct.
Not in 2017?
Correct.
Not ever?
Correct.
Now, Cohen worked at the Trump Organization for a long time, right?
Yeah.
About a decade?
Give or take. I don't know exactly how long he was there.
That's a rough ballpark?
Yes.
And your interactions with him were sporadic?
Minimal.
And then he left the Trump Organization in January of 2017, right?
Yes.
And at that point, he started to work as the personal attorney to President Trump, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Outside of the Trump Organization, right?
Correct.
Mr. Bernick, if you can please publish Government's Exhibit 37A in evidence. Thank you. This is one of the emails that Mr. Colangelo asked you about, right?
Yes.
This is an email that you sent to Deborah Tarasoff in February of 2017, right?
Yes.
Mr. Bernick, if we can please take a look at page 3 of the exhibit. This is an email thread that contains messages from Michael Cohen, correct?
Yes.
And in the year 2017?
Yes.
February of that year?
February 14, yes.
And let's take a look at page 5 of the exhibit. If you can zoom in on the signature blocks. This is the signature block that Cohen was using in 2017, right?
Yes.
Personal attorney to President Donald J. Trump, right?
Yes.
It doesn't say fixer, does it?
No.
And he is not using a Trump org email, correct?
If that bottom line is his email, it probably should be. Based on the signature block, yes, he did not.
It is a Gmail account, right?
Yes, sir.
And these signature blocks are consistent with your understanding of what Mr. Cohen was doing at that time in 2017, right?
Yes.
Which is that Mr. Cohen was acting as President Trump's personal attorney, correct?
Yes.
So by early 2017, for accounting purposes, Mr. Cohen was akin to a vendor to President Trump?
Yes.
Mr. Bernick, can we take a look at Government Exhibit 37C, please? And if you can bring up page 3. Can you see that okay?
Yes, sir.
This is one of the invoices that you testified about, right?
Yes, sir.
And if you take a look at the header, it says Michael D. Cohen and Associates PC, right?
Yes.
That acronym PC stands for Professional Corporation, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you don't know one way or the other whether Michael Cohen actually set up a professional corporation, do you?
No idea.
But you know that by this time period in 2017, he was purporting to have done so, right?
Yes.
And in that way, representing that he had an outside firm, correct?
You mean he was outside the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And you don't know one way or the other from your advantage point whether Mr. Cohen did legal work for President Trump in 2017, do you?
I do not know.
You don't know if he did legal work for President Trump in connection with Summer Zervos?
Who?
Summer Zervos?
No idea.
And you don't know whether Mr. Cohen did legal work in 2017 for members of President Trump's family, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Mr. Bernick, can you publish Government's Exhibit 37K? And if we can zoom in on the 9:31 a.m. email. So this is an email it's an email thread that you testified about earlier. This message is from Michael Cohen to Alan Weisselberg. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And do you see where it says, please call me to discuss the last open foundation matter?
Yes, sir.
And so does this suggest to you that in 2017 there was an open matter that Michael Cohen was handling?
Yes.
We can take that down. Thank you. Now, I think you said before that January 2017 was a period of flux and chaos at the Trump Organization?
That's putting it mildly.
And that's because President Trump had become president of the United States, right?
Yes, sir.
And the way of doing business at the company had to change, right?
Drastically.
Change drastically from what had gone on for decades, correct?
Yes, sir.
And there was a period where things were in flux because you were trying to figure out how to do that, right?
Yes, sir.
For the first time in decades, President Trump's main office was in Washington, D.C., hundreds of miles away, right?
Yes, sir.
So he was not in New York as much as he had been previously to sign personal checks?
I don't remember seeing him in New York at all.
During the time he was president?
Right, correct.
And he was the only signatory on his personal checking account, right?
That's correct.
Now, another change that happened around this time frame, late 2016, early 2017, is that President Trump's assets were moved into the trust, correct?
Yes.
That trust was accompanied by a set of detailed conflict of interest procedures, right?
No idea. I never saw the trust document, the actual trust documents. All I have seen was the chart, the structure chart, and there was the entity listing behind it and one paragraph inside the trust.
But you understood that the purpose of the trust was to eliminate potential conflicts of interest as President Trump ran the country, correct?
Objection.
Overruled, if you know.
I have no idea.
Do you recall that Sherry Dillon helped to develop the trust?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Dillon is outside counsel from a law firm, right?
Yes.
This trust structure was disclosed to the public in January of 2017?
I have no idea. I don't know that.
I would like to show the witness, the court, and the parties, if I could, Defense Exhibit H10. I want you, if you can take a look at that and let me know if it refreshes your recollection about public disclosure relating to the trust structure.
Objection, Your Honor. May we approach?
Sure.
Discussion is held at sidebar on the record.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, to the extent this is intended to refresh his recollection, he didn't say, no foundation has been laid. He didn't say that he might know and needs to be refreshed. He said he had no idea. Second, the attempt to offer this document, for this document to be offered as testimony or argument from counsel on cross or cross-examination, on anything other than refreshing his recollection, this appears to be an exhibit, or an attempt to admit an exhibit that the court already excluded for failure to disclose after months of requesting exhibits.
If we can have the answer read back. I thought he did.
Can you read it back?
I would like to show the witness, the court, and the parties, if I could, Defense Exhibit H10. I want you, if you can take a look at that and let me know if it refreshes your recollection about public disclosure relating to the trust structure.
I have no idea.
So I think when he says, I can ask, is it possible that something would refresh your recollection? I think that the answer is open enough to allow him to take a look at the document to see if it refreshes his recollection.
Sustained.
Discussion at sidebar concluded, and the following occurred in open court.
Sustained.
I think you testified on direct that there were 2 trustees to the trust,
Yes, sir.
and those trustees were one of President Trump's son and Alan Weisselberg, right?
Yes.
It was basically the trustee's responsibility to manage the trust, right?
Yes, sir.
And it was your understanding that the trust did not file some tax returns, right?
That's correct.
This was not an entity in that sense, right?
Correct.
And I think you said there are over 500 entities that were rolled up into this trust?
Before I left, there were over 500 entities, to my knowledge.
And either directly or indirectly, the trust owns all of them, correct?
Yes.
And that was true in 2017, right?
Yes.
And among those entities, there were thousands of employees, correct?
Yes.
The entities owned properties all over the world, correct?
Yes.
There were hotels with tens of thousands of guests, right?
Yes.
Members at golf courses in the thousands, right?
Yes.
Those facilities hosted weddings and other events.
Yes.
Because they were spread out all over the world, they involved settings with all different types of cultures, right?
Yes.
President Trump had all different types of partners all world, correct?
Yes.
And as a result of that diversity, there was very real commercial risks to adverse publicity, correct?
I am not a marketing person. It's hard for me to answer that question.
But you understood that the organization was paying marketing people, right?
Yes.
And that if there was news that was negative about President Trump or the organization, it was bad for business, correct?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
Yes, sir.
And each one of these entities, to the extent they had a bank account, had a general ledger. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there was a separate general ledger relating to President Trump's individual account, correct?
Personal bank accounts, yes.
That was in 2017, right?
From the day it started.
And the general ledger relating to President Trump was to cover his personal expenses, correct?
It was like his personal checkbook.
So that could include housing costs, right?
Housing costs, other personal real estate taxes.
Utility bills,
Yes.
educational expenses for his children.
Yes.
And these were all kept as part of a separate general ledger, right?
Yeah.
And you testified a little bit about keeping track of President Trump's cash position.
Yes, early on.
And whether you were doing that directly or responsible for people who were doing it, that continued throughout your time in the Trump organization?
I received weekly reports and took a look at it.
And there were times during the course of your employment where President Trump's cash position was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall that in 2017, there were times when that position was at least $60 million in unrestricted cash?
Well, at least.
And those reports that you were looking at, you understood them to be accurate, right?
Yes.
These things are true?
Yes, sir.
You were asked a lot of questions about the MDS system and legal expenses, right?
Yes.
And we talked a lot about the legal expenses account, which is number 51505, if I have that right.
That's correct.
I only have it right because I can read it. The legal expenses account was a specific item in the Charter of Accounts?
Yes.
It was basically part of a drop-down menu?
Yes.
In 2017, it sounds like the MDS system was a bit antiquated, was it not?
Yes.
I think you said you actually helped design it. That was in 1991?
1991.
And so these categories, there was a level of rigidity to them, right?
Yes.
If you were talking about payments to an attorney, legal expenses, that was the account that was used, right?
Yes, sir.
As this legal expenses account was used in 2017, the purpose was basically to make payments to attorneys so they could be reviewed at the end of the year, right?
Correct. Most legal expenses, most personal legal expenses, are not deductible for tax purposes.
You wanted to have one place where you knew you could find a way to discuss them with Mazars, the outside accountant?
Yes.
So Mazars could make decisions about deductions, correct?
That's correct.
You testified on direct examination about 2 conversations that you had with Alan Weisselberg in 2017, right?
Relating to this subject, yes.
Early 2017?
Early 2017, yes.
And during one of the conversations, you took some notes, if I understand it right?
Yes.
At another point, Weisselberg handed you a document, right?
Yes.
I think you said on direct that each of those interactions was short?
Very short.
Under 5 minutes?
Probably, yes.
Even less, maybe?
It could have been. It was a few years ago. I don't really remember.
During one of those conversations, Mr. Weisselberg conferred to you that Cohen was coming off the payroll of the Trump Corporation, correct?
That's correct.
And that is consistent with the email signature block that we looked at a minute ago?
Yes, when he became personal attorney for the president, yes.
And you said that Mr. Weisselberg mentioned that Cohen was seeking some kind of reimbursement, right?
Yes.
He, Weisselberg, did not say anything to you about what Cohen was seeking reimbursement for when you had these conversations in January of 2017, correct?
Correct.
And I would like to talk a little bit about your notes document, which is Government Exhibit 36. If we can bring that up, please. If we can zoom in a bit. Thank you. Now, I would like to direct your attention to the line that says X2 for taxes. Do you see that?
Yes.
I think you testified previously that you don't have a specific recollection of what Weisselberg told you that meant, right?
Right. He was just rattling off information I had to write down.
You were taking notes and just writing down what he said?
Yes.
And this was his idea, right?
Yes.
And you don't know where the idea came from, correct?
No, I don't.
Mr. Weisselberg had a lot of different experiences, but he was not a tax accountant, correct?
He was not a tax accountant.
Now, let's take a look at the document that Mr. Weisselberg handed you. Government Exhibit 35, please. Zoom in on the bottom, please. Now, I think you said you don't have a specific recollection of when Mr. Weisselberg handed you this document.
Correct.
You don't have a specific recollection of the conversation around the document, right?
Correct.
And it sounds like basically your present memory is that you understood you were supposed to keep track of this piece of paper that he handed you, right?
Yes.
Now, on direct, you sort of offered an interpretation of the words gross up. Do you remember that?
I don't remember the exact wording, but it sounds right.
I am referring to the entry on the page. I think you said it reads gross up to.
Yes.
But you don't know exactly what Weisselberg meant by that, do you?
No, nobody would know.
The idea to double the payment to make sure that Cohen got $180,000 after taxes, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
No.
And that's because the reimbursement would not have been taxable, right?
The expense reimbursement is not taxable.
And you don't know, do you, how, if at all, Mr. Cohen treated these payments on his taxes?
No idea.
And with respect to notes on the right side of the document, Red Finch, you don't know how this got there?
No, I have no idea who wrote that.
You don't know much of anything about Red Finch, do you?
No, I know very little about Red Finch.
You don't know if Cohen paid anything to Red Finch, right?
That's correct.
There's a reference on this document to a bonus, right?
Yes.
It says add additional bonus. I think you testified 60,000.
Yes.
When Cohen was an employee of the Trump Organization, the bonus would come out through the payroll, right?
Correct.
And in this flux period, that was a lot more complicated once he left the Trump Organization, correct?
What was more complicated?
How to pay the bonus. It wasn't as simple as just routing through payroll anymore. He didn't work there anymore.
Right.
We can take that down. Now, you testified on direct examination that you kept these two documents, government exhibits 35 and 36, your notes and the bank statement in the payroll book, right?
Yes.
In a cabinet in your office, right?
Locked in my office.
A cabinet that you locked, right?
Yes, sir.
And the reason that that cabinet was locked was because the payroll book contained a lot of sensitive information, right?
It was a drawer with other payroll information, not just that book.
It's not that these notes were particularly sensitive. It's that the payroll book contained personal identifying information relating to the thousands of employees, right?
Well, technically just employees that I was paying through Trump Payroll Corp. It was weekly reports, terminations, a lot of employee payroll information.
You locked the drawer to try to keep that sensitive information secure, right?
Yes.
We're talking about Social Security numbers, right?
Social Security numbers, dates of birth, salaries, bonuses.
And one of the reasons to try and keep salaries and bonuses secure is that you don't want rumors to get around about who is making what, right?
Yes.
Isn't a fact that most of the drawers in your office were locked?
Yes.
For the same reason, right?
That a lot of sensitive information.
So you kept it locked to keep it secure, right?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bernick, can we take a look at Government Exhibit 37A, please? And if we can go to page 2 and zoom in on the email. This is one of the messages that Michael Cohen sent to you in response to the request for an invoice, right?
Yes, sir.
And you see it says Michael D. Cohen, ESQ at the top, right?
Yes.
That's consistent with him being an outside personal attorney to President Trump, right?
Yes.
And you see where it says pursuant to the retainer agreement?
Yes.
Retainer agreements can be verbal, correct?
To my knowledge, yes.
And this invoice doesn't say anything about the condition of the Trump Organization, does it?
The condition of the Trump Organization?
The financial condition of the Trump Organization?
No.
And this invoice from President Trump's personal attorney for personal legal expenses does not say anything about the activities of the Trump Organization, right?
No.
Now, Mr. Bernick, can we zoom in on the email at 1203 and 1202 on page 1? These are two messages also on February 14th between you and Weisselberg, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Weisselberg refers to an agreement with Don, and you see that?
Yes.
Do you understand that is a reference to two of the president's sons?
Yes.
You have no idea what that reference to an agreement meant, correct?
Correct.
All that you took from that message was that these payments had been approved, right?
Yes.
Now, if we can look at the top email, please. Thank you. So this is a message that you sent to Ms. Tarasoff?
Yes.
With a copy to Alan Weisselberg, correct?
Yes.
You asked Ms. Tarasoff to pay Mr. Cohen from the trust.
Yes.
And that turned out to be a mistake, right?
Yes.
And you learned that later?
Yes.
And part of the issue was that this was all new to the accounting department, correct?
Yes.
By this, I mean trying to figure out how to pay President Trump's personal expenses while he was in Washington, D.C., right?
Yes.
And so at the time you sent this email, it was not clear to you how you could get President Trump to sign a check, right?
Correct.
And so based on conversations with others, your understanding was that it should be paid from the trust in order to get around that practical issue, right?
Yes.
And that was all the thought that went into it, correct?
That is about it.
When somebody told you that President Trump could actually sign checks from his personal account, you fixed the procedure, right?
I was told he should be paying through his personal account.
And at that point, all the payments after that were paid out of President Trump's personal checking account, right?
For this matter, yes.
Right. In response to the emails that Michael Cohen sent?
Yes.
And you were asked some questions about 1099 forms that the Trump Organization issued to Cohen, right?
Yes.
I think that is Government Exhibit 93, if we can bring that up. Can we zoom in here? So this 1099 was issued by the trust, correct, the pair?
Yes.
And it indicates that $5,000 was paid to Mr. Cohen. Do you see that on the bottom?
Yes, that was his signature, vendor abbreviation.
Vendor abbreviation relating to the personal attorney he was providing that were logged on the General Services ledger?
Objection.
Sustained.
What is a vendor abbreviation?
What happens is multi-data has various locations where it has abbreviations. We talked about DJT and DJT Revocable, the company abbreviations. For vendors, you needed a vendor abbreviation. So Michael D. Cohen, Esquire, was the name on the check. The vendor name would be M. Cohen.
So once Michael Cohen left the Trump Organization and became the personal attorney to President Trump, he became a vendor for your purposes, right?
Yes.
And he had a specific vendor identity within the boxes, right?
Yes.
And this is an abbreviation that reflects that vendor identity for Michael Cohen as an outside personal attorney to President Trump, correct?
Yes.
If we can go to the second page, please. So this second 1099 reflects payments from President Trump's personal account to Michael Cohen as personal attorney, correct?
Yes.
And you see in box 7, it's listed $315,000 in payments?
Yes.
And so this is consistent with what you talked about earlier. The first $335,000 payments were paid out of the trust. That is the $105,000 on page 1 of this exhibit, right?
Yes.
And the remaining payments added up to $315,000. This is the 1099 reflecting those payments from President Trump's personal account, right?
Correct.
And you sent this form. This form was sent to Michael Cohen, right?
Yes.
And these payments were also disclosed to the IRS, right?
Yes.
Because one of the purposes of this form is to make clear to the IRS that payments have been made to a vendor, right?
Yes.
And there is no place on this form to break down payments for legal services versus expenses incurred by a lawyer during the provision of those services, right?
That's correct.
There is one figure that the Trump Organization reported as being paid to Michael Cohen during the 2017, right?
That's correct.
Then it's Michael Cohen's job, is it not, to make decisions about how to account for these payments on his personal taxes, right?
Yes.
You don't know what he did with that?
That's correct.
I would like to talk a little bit about the 278E form, that government ethics form, very briefly. Can we take a look at Government Exhibit 81, and if we can zoom in on all the signatures here? And so you said that the top signature is President Trump's, right?
Yes.
And then the signature below that is actually two signature from the Office of Government Ethics, right?
I believe so, yes.
And if you see that there is sort of some fine print between the two signatures?
I'm not sure where you are looking.
Agency, ethics official.
I was looking down below.
If we can highlight that right under President Trump's signature. So that says, on the basis of information contained in this report, I conclude that the filer is in compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Do you see that?
Yes.
And the reimbursement to Michael Cohen was disclosed in this form, right?
Yes.
If we can take a look at, I think it's page 45, Bates ending 6,360. Zoom in on the very bottom. If we can zoom in on the footnotes, please. You're closer to the screen than I am. Can you read that?
Yes, sir.
This is a disclosure regarding the aspects of these payments that was already reimbursed.
The bottom two lines.
Sent to the federal government in 2018, right?
Yes.
And signed off by the Office of Government Ethics, right?
Yes.
Nothing further.
People, any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few questions. Mr. McConney, do expense reimbursements ordinarily get reported to the IRS?
No.
Can we pull up People's 35 for a minute? You were asked some questions about this document on cross-examination. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do any of the notes on this document refer to a retainer agreement?
No, sir.
Do any of the notes on this document refer to work performed in 2017?
No, sir.
You also were asked some questions about the conversations you had with Mr. Weisselberg around the time he gave you these handwritten notes. Do you remember those questions?
Yes, sir.
Were you yourself privy to any conversations between Mr. Trump and Mr. Weisselberg about these payments?
No, sir.
How about any conversations between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen?
For this matter, no.
Did you participate in any conversations with the three them, Mr. Trump, Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Weisselberg about these payments?
No, sir.
Have you come to learn since leaving the Trump Organization that there were matters that Mr. Weisselberg kept you in the dark about?
Objection.
Overruled.
Hearsay.
Yes.
Your answer is yes?
Sorry, yes.
This was all happening above your head?
Yes.
You were told to do something and you did it?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
You were asked whether reimbursements are typically disclosed to the IRS just now. Do you remember that question?
Yes.
All the payments to Michael Cohen in 2017 were disclosed to the IRS on the 1099 that the government put in evidence, correct?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You can step down. We're going to take our lunch recess. I will see you at 2:15. Enjoy your lunch. See you at 2:15. People, your next witness, please, let's get the jury.
Are you still trying to call Ms. Longstreet Joseph next?
She's not going to be called next.
There is an issue you wanted to take up?
Yes, it doesn't sound like it's for the next witness. The witness that we believe is testifying next. We were just informed a half hour ago. We have, from what we have just been told a few minutes ago, we have objections to several of the exhibits if this witness is going to go first. Do you want to do that now?
We can start.
So, our understanding for many of the exhibits that the next witness will offer, our objection is exactly the one that we raised earlier today, which is the invoice itself from Mr. Cohen is not a business record, and we object to it being part of the Trump Organization records. A little bit different with this witness because for some of them, there is a stamp on the invoice that I believe she will testify that she applied to the invoice. That certainly would be a business record, but the invoice itself, we believe, is inadmissible hearsay offered for the truth. I can give you those exhibits now, or...
Let me hear from the people.
Judge, as counsel mentioned, they're invoices that come into the Trump Organization, that then the Trump Organization acts upon and makes payments based upon. I believe all or most of the invoices will be talked about with this witness. She applied a stamp to and then wrote in certain information. So these are clearly records that the Trump Organization gets and then looks at and makes their own, takes actions based upon. Each witness will testify to all of them.
So, the way I understand it from Mr. McConney's testimony, they wouldn't pay out on anything unless they had an invoice. They would receive the invoice and make that invoice part of the package. They would make general ledger entries. They would cut the check. It would become part of the package. Also, is that part of the res gesti?
Yes, Judge.
What was the last thing you said?
It's part of the crime, the res gesti.
So, Your Honor, I don't dispute what the court just said. That is what the Trump Organization does. Our objection is a little bit different. While they certainly need an invoice to pay and won't pay without an invoice, the invoice itself that causes them to pay is being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, meaning the statements by Mr. Cohen in this case are being offered as a business record, exception to the hearsay rule. That's our objection. The more meaningful objection, it's not the same as the one we raised this morning. From our understanding, the people are going to offer People's Exhibit 42 through this witness, who we believe is a Trump Organization employee. And it appears to us, unless we're wrong, to be Capital One bank records, and we very much object to that. I can walk through the information on this exhibit that is, in theory, going to be offered for the truth. There is no way this witness can offer a business record foundation for this.
Who is the witness?
Judge, the next witness is Deborah Tarasoff, who works in the Accounts Payable Department. She will testify that this Exhibit 42 is a series of canceled checks, and it's routine for the Trump Organization to get canceled checks for all of its accounts and keep them as part of the record keeping for the organization and for the various accounts that it had. And so, these canceled checks, while they were generated by Capital One, were produced by the Trump Organization from their records.
Is that what you are referring to?
Yes, although our understanding is they were produced from the bank. Again, we just did this a few minutes ago. Even they were going to offer this. If the witness is going to testify that she received these canceled checks and can explain what the very detailed information is on those personal checks from Capital One, like TRM debit, explain why certain account holders signed the checks and things like that. Again, it's being offered as a business record as opposed to something she just received. We object to that.
Can I see it?
Yes.
So these were checks that were cut by a Trump Organization employee, right?
Yes.
Trump Organization Revocable Trust. They cut it. They made a payment with it in this case. The one I am looking at was to Michael Cohen. It goes to the bank processing. It gets canceled at that point, and they get it back.
Correct.
I don't know if that is true, if they laid the foundation that way, but the checks are already coming in separately. This is the document from Capital One. If Your Honor looks at the first page of the exhibit, there is all kinds of information stamped on this check. There are kinds of information that is typed presumably by Capital One, not by the Trump Organization. You move on to other checks, there is information on these checks that I don't think this witness can explain. For example, on the second page, it says something totally different on the stamped check. It says something about Richmond, Virginia. It has a signatory that isn't Mr. Cohen. And the point is, The reason why you are supposed to lay a foundation and have the witness testify about the records and what they mean, as we heard this morning from Mr. McConney, there needs to be enough foundation laid to explain and justify the information on the check that is hearsay to allow it into evidence for the truth. There is a lot of information on this check that I don't think this witness can explain. Now, the checks are coming into evidence themselves. Of course, we're not objecting to those.
So the checks are coming into evidence. You have a problem with the canceled checks coming into evidence?
I have a problem with Exhibit 42, which is a bank record, we believe from Capital One, being offered as an exception to the hearsay rule by a Trump Organization witness.
I don't have a problem with it. It's a canceled check. It's the same check that Ms. Tarasoff presumably generated herself and actually paid out. I think that she is certainly capable of testifying that this was standard business practices, that they would receive these canceled checks every month or every 6 weeks, whatever. It could come in as business record. It could even possibly come in as real evidence.
Your Honor, I do not object. We do not question that she can testify to most of what you just said, which is she would receive these in the regular course. What she can't testify to is the business record part.
You are talking about the codes and the stamps and everything else.
The hearsay that is being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. The business record exception to the hearsay rule.
Judge, I don't anticipate eliciting from her what the codes mean. I anticipate eliciting from her what it is. A check that she issued to Michael Cohen, and a reflection of the fact that it was cashed and canceled by the bank.
That's what I am assuming is going to happen. She is going to say, this was the check that I generated. I received it back from the bank. It demonstrates it was cashed. The check number, the same payee, the same amount. You want to ask her about these codes and these stamps in the back? You can. I don't think that is necessary to get the document into evidence.
We believe it's a business record of a bank. That's our objection.
Okay, noted. Overruled. Anything else?
Not from the people.
Jury entering courtroom.
You may be seated.
Case on trial continued. All jurors are present and properly seated.
People, next witness.
At this time, the people call Deborah Tarasoff.
Witness entering courtroom. Remain standing. Raise your right hand. Face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you are going to give before this court and jury shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Do you so swear or affirm?
I do.
Thank you. Have a seat. Pull your chair all the way up. State your full name, spelling your last name.
Deborah Tarasoff, Tarasoff.
County of residence.
Westchester County.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You may inquire.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
If you remember, try to speak slowly and into the microphone. That will be great. Ms. Tarasoff, are you employed?
Yes, I am.
Where do you work?
For the Trump Organization.
And where is the Trump Organization?
725 Fifth Avenue.
How long have you worked there?
24 years.
What is the Trump Organization?
It's a company that deals in real estate.
And who is the owner of the Trump Organization?
Correct me if I am wrong, Mr. Trump.
I just quickly want to ask you, are you here today with your attorneys?
Yes.
And do you know who is paying for your attorneys?
Yes.
Who is paying for your attorneys?
The Trump Organization.
I think you said you have been at the Trump Organization around 24 years?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Just high school.
What did you do after high school?
I went to work.
Where did you work?
I do believe my first job was with Liberty Mutual. Then I went to a company. It was a lawyer, and he dealt with real estate and parking lots and garages in the city.
What kind of work did you do for the lawyer?
The lawyer, I paid bills also.
And how long did you do that?
17 years.
And then did you stop working?
Yes.
Why did you stop working?
I took care of my daughters.
Did there come a time that you went back to work?
Yes.
When was that?
In '99, when my husband passed away.
And did you go straight to the Trump Organization at that time?
No, I went in 2000.
So you did something else for a year?
I stayed home with the girls.
Is the Trump Organization made up of a number of entities?
Yes.
Where is the Trump Organization headquartered?
Now or before?
Well, let's start with now.
Now, well, technically I think it is in Florida.
How about back in the time frame of 2015, 16, and 17?
725 Fifth Avenue.
Here in Manhattan?
Yes.
Do you have any sense of how many entities make up the Trump Organization?
There is a bunch.
Over 100?
I think close to it, yes.
What was your title when you started at the Trump Organization?
Accounts payable.
And what is your title now?
Accounts payable supervisor.
Do you have you a work-issued email address?
Yes.
Has it been the same since you started?
No.
Do you recall what it was when you started?
What was it before?
Yes.
Yes, it was D. Tarasoff.
And was the domain name trumporg.com?
Yes.
And that changed?
It just added the full name now, Deborah Tarasoff.
Okay, does everyone you work with have a Trump.org email domain?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the departments and people at the Trump organization. You work in accounts payable?
Yes.
Is that part of the accounting department at the Trump organization?
Yes.
Where did the accounting department sit, or where did it sit in the period of 2015 to 2017?
Same location where we've always been.
Which is where?
On the 26th floor.
What else is on the 26th floor?
The legal department and Mr. Trump's office.
And that's at the address you gave us earlier, 275 Fifth Avenue.
Yes.
Do you know somebody named Rebecca Minocchio?
Yes, I do.
Who is she?
She was an administrative assistant at that time. Now she works in accounts receivable.
Do you know someone named Alan Garton?
Yes.
Who is he?
He's a lawyer.
And how long have you known him?
For as long as he's worked there.
Do you know somebody named Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Who was Michael Cohen?
He was a lawyer that worked there.
Did he work there in the period of 2015 until early 2017?
Yes.
Where did he sit when he worked there?
He sat in 2 different locations.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Outside my office, there is another office right next to it. He sat there. And then he moved to the other side of the floor.
Of the 26th floor?
Of the 26th floor.
Do you know Jeffrey McConney?
Yes.
Who is Jeffrey McConney?
He is the assistant controller.
Did you work closely with Jeff McConney?
Yes, I did.
How long has he been at the Trump organization, if you know?
He was there before me.
For longer than 24 years?
Yes.
Were you familiar with how he usually did things at work?
Yes.
Did you go to him with questions about expenses?
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about what you do in accounts payable? What does that mean, and what do you do?
I get approved bills. I enter them into the system and I cut the checks and I mail them out. I used to.
And I apologize, I am jumping around a little bit here. I want to go back to Mr. McConney. Do you know what his title was back in 2016 or 2017?
I do believe it's assistant controller.
Did Mr. McConney oversee everything in the accounting department?
Yes.
Who is Alan Weisselberg?
He was the CFO.
When you say he was the CFO, is he no longer at the company?
Correct.
How closely did you work with Alan Weisselberg?
About the same as Jeff. A little less, maybe.
What was Mr. Weisselberg's management style?
He had his hands in everything.
Did you withdraw? Did he interact with Mr. Trump often, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, yes.
And now, speaking about that time period of 2015 to early 2017, did he interact with Mr. Trump often back then?
Yes.
Do you know somebody named Rona Graff?
Yes.
Who is Rona Graff?
She was Mr. Trump's assistant.
With respect to Mr. Trump, did you work directly with Mr. Trump?
No.
Did you see Mr. Trump around the office back in the time period of 2015 to early 2017?
Yes.
You said earlier that back in 2015 to 2017, Mr. Weisselberg, it was your sense that he spoke to Mr. Trump frequently, is that right?
Yes.
Do you know if Mr. Weisselberg liked to run financial decisions by Mr. Trump before engaging in particular actions?
From my knowledge, yes.
I want to talk a little bit now about your role in accounts payable, which you described for us earlier. Do you have a lot of decision-making authorities in your role as accounts payable supervisor?
No.
Back in 2015 to 2017, that time period, did you have a lot of decision-making authority then?
No.
Did you pretty much just follow instructions?
Yes.
Would you hear about it if you incorrectly made a mistake to follow instructions?
Yes.
Who would you hear about it from?
It could be whoever gave me the bill, that I paid it wrong.
Who would that have been most often?
It could have been Mr. Weisselberg. It could have been Jeffrey McConney, the legal department, if they said I paid it wrong.
In the period of 2016 and 2017, who did you report to?
Basically Jeffrey McConney.
When it came to handling the accounts payable, how many entities, if you know, did you handle accounts payable for?
50 to 60, maybe more.
And did you do your job the same way with respect to all of these entities?
Yes.
You explained to us what accounts payable is. What is accounts receivable?
Accounts receivable, you get the money in. Accounts payable, you give it out.
And are you familiar with the term general ledger?
I am.
What is the general ledger?
That's what everything goes into, and they keep track things.
When you say everything goes into...
Accounts receivable and accounts payable. Any transactions.
Did you make entries yourself through an accounting system into the general ledger?
Yes, the accounts payable.
Do you remember the name of that accounting system?
Multidata MDS.
Can you briefly describe the process that you would use back in 2016 and 2017 when you got an invoice to pay an accounts payable?
I would get it when it's approved. I would enter it into the accounting system. I would cut the check, get it signed, and mail it out.
And is that essentially the same process that you had used for your entire career at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
You said an invoice would be approved?
Yes.
Who could approve invoices?
Alan Weisselberg, Jeffrey McConney. Obviously, Mr. Trump. Anybody in the legal department.
And for these questions, I pretty much want to focus on the time period 2016-2017. Is that okay?
Sure.
Is that answer accurate for that time period?
Yes.
Did the dollar amount of an invoice impact who could approve it?
Yes.
How?
If it was under a certain amount, Alan would have approved it. If it was over, it would have to be approved by somebody higher up.
Who was higher up than Alan Weisselberg?
It would be Eric Trump, Don Jr., or Mr. Trump.
One of the Trumps?
Yes.
Do you recall in the time period of 2016 to 2017 what that dollar amount was that would have to be approved? To what amount could Alan Weisselberg approve an invoice?
Before 2015, it was $2,500. After that, it was $10,000.
So anything over that amount had to be approved by Mr. Trump or Eric Trump or Don Dr. Trump?
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the general ledger. Did each of the entities that you handled at the Trump Organization have its own general ledger?
Yes.
And did it have a code that associated it with or that you would enter for each entity into the general ledger?
Yes.
As part of your responsibilities in accounts payable, did you handle accounts payable for an entity called DJT?
Yes.
What was that?
DJT is Mr. Trump's personal account.
And did that account have its own general ledger?
Yes.
And that is back in 2015, 16, 17?
Yes.
And you process the accounts payable for that account the same way you for all the other accounts?
Yes.
And did you cut checks from that account?
Yes.
Do you recall withdrawn? Once you cut a check, what would you do with it?
Which account?
Let's say from the DJT account back in 2017, 2016, 2017, that time period?
Before he was president or after?
Let's start with before.
Before, I would cut the check, put it together with the backup, and bring it over to Rona, so she would bring it in to Mr. Trump to sign.
You said put it together with the backup?
The invoice.
Was there ever more than an invoice, or was it usually just an invoice?
Basically, it's just an invoice.
And how would you put the check together with the invoice?
Just put the check on top of the invoice, staple it, and bring it over.
And you said you would bring it over to Rona?
Yes.
At some point, would you get those back?
Yes.
Were they in the same condition when you got them back?
They would be signed.
And were the invoice and the check still stapled together?
Yes.
Did you have a general practice? Would you staple the check on top of the invoice, or the invoice on top of the check, or did it vary?
The check is on top of the invoice.
And withdrawn. Were you responsible for reimbursing expenses to vendors?
Yes.
Did you generally require proof of an expense?
Yes.
What kind of expense?
The backup receipt.
And how much would the Trump Organization usually reimburse when an employee incurred an expense?
Whatever amount it was.
So, if an employee incurred an expense of $100, how much would the Trump Organization reimburse?
$100.
Now, you talked a little bit about invoices. I want to talk a little bit about who could sign checks, particularly for the DJT account. Who could sign checks for the DJT account in 2016 or 2017?
You are talking about Mr. Trump's personal account?
Yes.
Only Mr. Trump.
Was that true back in 2016 and 2017?
Yes.
If you know, is that still true today?
Yes, it is.
That was any check. It didn't matter the amount?
It didn't matter.
With respect to approving invoices, was the ultimate approvement of payment the signing of the check?
Say that again.
That's okay. We talked a little bit about approving invoices. Did an approved invoice mean that a check had to be signed?
Yes.
Could the person signing the check decide not to sign the check?
Yes.
And so if, for example, Alan Weisselberg approved an invoice, did somebody have to sign that check, or was there still another level of approval?
If Alan approved it, no. I would put it in and cut it and get it signed.
What if you cut a check from the DJT account? Did Mr. Trump have to sign the check because Mr. Weisselberg approved it?
No. If he didn't want to sign it, he didn't sign it.
Did you ever see situations where he didn't sign checks?
Yes.
What would happen in those situations?
He would write void on it and send it back.
How do you know he would write void on it?
It was signed in a Sharpie in black. That is what he usually uses.
In the 24 years that you have been there, have you seen Mr. Trump's handwriting?
Yes.
And his signature?
Yes.
Are you familiar with his handwriting?
Yes.
And are you familiar with his signature?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about the period in early 2017 after Mr. Trump became president. Do you know what the DJT Revocable Trust is?
I know it's a checking account.
So you know it has a checking account. Do you handle accounts payable for that account as well?
Yes.
And do you handle accounts Payable for that account the same way you do for the DJT accounts we just discussed and all the accounts you handle?
Yes.
Do you recall when you started handling the DJT Revocable Trust account?
When they started it.
Was that when he became president in 2017?
I don't recall when it came into effect.
Do you recall if there was too specific requirement that two people sign checks over $10,000 for the Revocable Trust?
There was a time, yes.
And going now, we talked a little bit about the DJT account. Once Mr. Trump became president, did he still sign all the checks for that account?
For which one?
For the DJT, his personal account?
His personal, yes.
I want to talk a little bit about, I want to direct your attention to the period of 2017. You worked with Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Did he leave the Trump organization at some point?
Yes.
Do you recall when he left?
No.
Was it around the time that Mr. Trump became president?
I don't recall.
Do you recall processing payments to Michael Cohen after he left the Trump organization?
I do believe so, yes.
And were those payments that were paid from the DJT account that we talked about a little while ago?
Yes.
Do you recall generally how the payments to Michael Cohen after he left the Trump organization were processed in 2017?
Yes.
How were they processed?
The same way that everything else is processed.
So for each payment, did you get an invoice?
Yes.
Did you get an approval email?
Yes.
Do you remember who you would get those emails from?
Jeffrey McConney.
Did you enter each invoice into the multi-data system?
Yes.
And did you cut a check for each invoice?
Yes.
If I may, I would like to show the witness the drive. Ms. Tarasoff, this contains exhibits marked Peoples 1 through 34, 41, and 42 for identification. Are all of those records that are kept by the Trump organization in the ordinary course of business?
Yes.
Before testifying here today, did you have a chance to review the documents on the thumb drive?
Yes.
How do you know that is the thumb drive that you reviewed?
My signature and the date is on them.
Are there redactions on some of the exhibits on the thumb drive?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to review the unredacted versions of each exhibit and compare them to the redacted versions?
Yes.
Were the two sets of exhibits the same except for the redactions?
Yes.
And are the records contained on there the kinds of records we have been discussing, including checks, stapled invoices, general ledger vouchers, some emails, and a set of canceled checks?
Yes.
Were the records kept in the ordinary course of business at the Trump Organization?
Yes.
Was it part of the ordinary course of the Trump Organization's business to keep and maintain these records?
Yes.
Were the people keeping and maintaining the records under a business duty to do so accurately?
Yes.
Were the entries reflected in each of the records made at or close to the time to the activity that they reflect?
Yes.
Judge, at this time I'm offering Peoples 1 to 34 and Peoples 41 and 42 into evidence.
Subject to the discussion earlier with the objections. You want me to give the number to the objections, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
Based on our discussion earlier, we object to Exhibit 8, 11, 14, 17, 20, 23, 26, 29, 32, and 42 for the reasons stated.
Thank you. Peoples 1 through 34, 41, and 42 are accepted into evidence as business records. You can still voice your objection.
Thank you, Judge. I want to talk a little about 2017 before we start looking at the records. In 2017, after Mr. Trump became the president, did anything change with respect to how checks were signed for the DJT account?
No.
In other words, he had to sign all the personal checks still?
From his personal account, yes.
But he was not in New York anymore, correct?
Yes.
So how would that happen?
We would send them to the White House for him to sign.
So even when he was in D.C., no one else had authority to sign those checks?
That's right.
Did you prepare the checks for signature the same way that you always have?
Yes.
Do you know how the checks were sent to D.C.?
By Federal Express.
If you know, who did that at the Trump Organization?
I think at the time Rebecca Minocchio did.
How did she get the checks?
I gave them to her.
And then, do you know what would happen with the checks when they went to D.C.?
No.
Did you at some point, do you know whether the checks were sent to the White House or somewhere else?
I don't know. Did you at some point get the checks back?
Yes.
And would they be signed?
Yes.
By who?
Mr. Trump.
And then, once you got them back, what would you do with the signed check and the backup? I would pull them apart, mail the check, and file the backup.
When you say file the backup, you would put it into the records of the Trump Organization?
Yes.
I would like to now, if we could, pull up what's already in evidence as People's Exhibit 37A. If we could just blow up the top email. Ms. Tarasoff, can you tell us, is this an email that you received?
Yes.
What's the date?
February 14th, 2017.
And can you tell us, if you could read that into the record and then tell us what you did once you received that email,
I was given instructions to pay this invoice from the trust and post to legal expenses.
If we could just scroll down a couple of pages. There, that's great. Is this the invoice?
Yes.
Page 2 of that exhibit?
Yes, it looks like that.
So you got that email and it was an instruction to pay this invoice?
Yes.
We could take that down if you could pull up People's One in evidence. Ms. Tarasoff, if you take a look at that, is that actually the same email thread that we just looked at?
Can you make it bigger?
Sure. Can you blow up the top half of People's One?
Basically looks like it, yes.
You see there's a stamp on the, as you're looking at it on the right side of the document, do you see that stamp?
Yes, I do.
What's that stamp?
That's my stamp.
So you put that there?
Yes.
It says at the top, accounts payable?
Yes.
There is some handwriting.
Did you write that handwriting? Yes.
Can you explain, first of all, at the top it says entity number. Then what did you write in there?
DJT Revocable Trust, that's what it stands for.
What you actually wrote was DJ Trev, right?
Yes, that's the little code for it.
That's the code for the DJT Revocable Trust?
Yes.
In the GL code, you wrote a number. What's that number?
51505.
What's that number?
That's legal expense.
Above the stamp, do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what those are?
Those are the voucher numbers.
When you say the voucher numbers, what's the vouchers?
When you enter it into the computer system, once you finish, it gives you that number.
We could take that down if we could pull up People's Two in evidence. If you could just blow up the top half for now? Can you tell us what this document is?
This is the actual voucher after I finish entering it into the system.
Do you see the voucher number that you had handwritten invoice on here somewhere?
Yes.
Where is that?
It's up on the top left if you're looking at it.
Where the highlighting is now?
Yes.
Does it indicate, is there an indication of the company?
Yes.
Is that the DJ Trev that you had written in?
Yes.
What does it say next to it?
It says the actual name of the company.
Who is the vendor on this or the payee on this voucher?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the invoice amount?
Excuse me?
What is the invoice amount?
$35,000.
And did you put something in the ledger distributions?
Yes, I put the legal expense code.
If we could blow up the bottom half of that, you see in their invoice information?
Yep.
In the invoice number, what's been put in there?
I put the date.
And the due date?
Yes.
And so is one the first of the month and one the last day of January?
The computer puts in the due date.
Okay. And the invoice date?
The invoice date I put in.
Underneath that, do you see an invoice description?
Yes.
And what does it say there?
I put in retainer for January.
And did you put that in 2 times?
The computer puts it in automatically.
Okay, where did you get that information?
From the invoice.
From the invoice that we just looked at?
Yes.
And in fact, where are you getting all of the information that you're inputting into this voucher?
From the invoice.
I just want to look at the bottom box now where it says voucher status.
Okay.
First of all, it says created by, and who's that?
Myself.
And what date did you create this on?
February 14th.
Just above that, do you see it says completed in AL, and then a number, and then CD, and then a number? What are those numbers?
That's the AP. CD is the disbursement batch.
So the CD number is the disbursement batch number?
Uh-huh, yes.
All right, we could take that down. If we could look at People's 3, I won't walk you through all of those boxes. If you could blow up the top half again. Now, is this another payment voucher?
Yes, it is.
And is it the same company indicated?
Yes.
Who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
What's the invoice amount?
$35,000.
And what's the ledger distribution?
Legal expense?
Did you put that information in there?
Yes.
And where did you get that?
From the invoice.
And it has the same general ledger account code?
Yes.
If we could look at the bottom. Now, if we could look at People's 4. If you could first blow up the 2/3 of that. Ms. Tarasoff, what is this?
That's a copy of a check.
What are these 2 parts of the check?
Stubs.
Can we just look, are the 2 stubs the same?
Yes.
Could we just blow up the top part of the first stub? Perfect. If you look at that, how much is that check for?
The check is $70,000.
If you look just above that, is the description in 2 different line items?
Yes.
What are the 2 line items?
One is for January, and one is for February.
Is each one for the same amount?
Yes.
How much is that?
$35,000.
So would it be fair to say that this check, were the 2 vouchers that we just looked at, did the information from those vouchers get put into these stubs, and was this check generated by those 2 vouchers?
Yes.
By the MDS system?
Yes.
So this is one check for $70,000, but it's for 2 different payments?
Yes.
And at the bottom left, what does it say?
To Michael Cohen.
If we could take that down, and if we could actually look at the check itself, is this a check from the DJT Revocable Trust account?
Yes, it is.
And who is it to the order of?
Michael Cohen.
And do you see the 2 signature lines there?
Yes.
First of all, Can you read what's typed above those two lines?
2 signatures needed on amounts over 10,000.
What's the check amount here?
70,000.
And what's the check number?
138.
Now, do you recognize the 2 signatures there?
Yes, I do.
Whose signatures are those?
The top one is Eric, and the bottom one is Alan Weisselberg.
When you say Eric,
Eric Trump.
I also just want to ask you, do you see that it says void in 3 places on the check?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
When you make a photocopy, the word void comes up.
So the check itself was not void, but when you photocopy it, that's what happens?
Yes.
Okay, take the check itself down. We talked a little bit earlier about how you would prepare checks to be signed. So was this entire document presented to whoever was going to be signing the check?
Yes.
And it was stapled on top of the invoice?
Yes.
And the invoice was the first exhibit we looked at which had your stamp on it. Is that right?
Yes.
So there would have been that. And this stapled on top?
Yes.
If we could now look at People's 378, can we just pull out the top email? What is this?
It's an email from Jeff.
To
Alan.
And who else?
And me.
And what's the date?
March 16th, 2017.
And what does it say?
It says, Deb, please pay. Post to same GL as last month. Thanks, Jeff.
What does that all mean to you?
I do the same thing as I did the month before.
This is another, can I call it an approval email?
Yes.
And based on getting this email, you undertake the process we talked about with respect to exhibits 1 through 4?
Yes.
Now, if you could pull up if you could just blow up the top email and enough of it so that the whole stamp is visible. Actually, if you could take that down, if you could go to the middle email and blow that up. Is this the same email that we were just looking at?
It does look like it, yes.
Now, if you could blow up the top part of the exhibit again. What, is this an email? Do you respond to Mr. McConney when he says, please pay?
Yes.
What do you say?
Sure, will do.
What does the stamp on the right side of the page as you look at it indicate?
That's my stamp again.
So, does that indicate that you said will do, and then you did?
Yes.
And, again, the information in that stamp, what entity is going to be paying this?
DJ Trev.
What's the amount?
35,000.
What's the general ledger code?
Legal expense.
What was the voucher number that this is associated with?
The voucher number is 846907.
If we could take that down, if you could pull up People 6, if we could just if you can blow up the whole screen, less the blank part of the page. Can you read that, Ms. Tarasoff?
Yes, I can.
What's the voucher number on this voucher?
846907.
And the entity that's going to be paying?
DJ Trev.
Who is going to be paid?
Michael Cohen.
In what amount?
35,000.
What is the ledger distribution description?
Legal expense.
The account this money is coming, or the general ledger code this is being coded to?
Legal expense.
And that's the 50515?
Yes.
If you look on the left side as you're looking at it, do you see an invoice description?
Yes.
What's the invoice description here?
I put retainer for March.
Of 2017?
Yes.
And again, at the bottom, you see that it was created by you?
Yes.
Is there a check number on there?
Yes.
What's the check number here?
147.
And that check number should correlate to the check that's generated to pay this invoice? Is that right?
Yes.
If we could pull up what's in evidence as People's 7. And what is this?
A copy of a check.
And if we could blow up one of the stubs. And what account is this coming from, or is this check related to?
GA Trev.
Who's going to be receiving this check?
Michael Cohen.
What's the description?
Retainer for March 2017.
And the invoice amount?
35,000.
And is there a check number on the stub?
Yes.
What is it?
147.
If we can go down and blow up the check itself, what's the amount on this check?
35,000.
Is it made out to Michael Cohen?
Yes, it is.
Do you recognize the signatures on this check?
Yes, I do.
Whose signatures are those?
The top one is Donald Trump Jr. The bottom one is Alan Weisselberg.
Thank you. We can take that down if you could pull up People's 37C. If we could just blow up the top part of that. Ms. Tarasoff, is that an email to you?
Looks like it.
Who is it from?
Jeff McConney.
What's the date?
March 13th, 2017.
And what does the body of the email say?
It says, please pay.
We could take that down? What date did you...
It says April 13th, 2017.
Thank you. We can take that down and go to page 2. Page 3. If you could blow up the part with the writing on it. Ms. Tarasoff, what is this?
It's an invoice.
Is this the invoice that was attached to the email we just looked at?
Yes.
Who is it an invoice from?
Michael Cohen.
For what amount?
35,000.
And what does it say the 35,000 is for?
The retainer agreement.
We can take that down. You could put up People's 8. Is this that same invoice with one difference? Does it have your stamp on it?
Yes.
Again, you put the stamp on there?
Yes.
And you wrote in the information contained in there?
Yes.
Now, what account is this coming from?
Now it's coming from Mr. Trump, personally.
How can you tell that?
Because I wrote DJT.
That's instead of DJ Trev. So essentially, the entity code, you switched the code from the Revocable Trust to the Trump account.
Yes.
Is it the same dollar amount?
Yes.
And the same general ledger code, 51505?
Yes.
We can take that down if we could pull up people's 9. Again, blow up that's perfect, thank you. Now, is this another MDS voucher?
Yes, it is.
What's the voucher number?
858770.
Now, if you look at company just below that, what's the company?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Okay, the name of the company is Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
So this month it switched from the Revocable Trust to Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
And if you look at ledger distributions, what's the description there?
Retainer, April 2017.
Sorry, that was the invoice description, right?
Oh, yes.
Thank you, because that was going to be next. Then, can you go to the other side of the page? Ledger distribution.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's legal expense. 51505.
And what's the amount?
$35,000.
What's the check number on this?
2740.
Now, if we could pull up People's 10, again, just looking at one of the stubs, what is the account that this check is being drawn off of?
It's coming out of Mr. Trump's personal account.
Who's the payee?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the description?
Retainer for April 2017.
And the invoice amount?
$35,000.
Now, I want you to look directly below that. Do you see check date?
Yes.
What's the check date?
June 19th, 2017.
Now, do you recall why the April check ended up with a June 19th check date?
No.
If we could pull up what's in evidence as People's 41, if we could just blow up the top portion of that page, do you recognize what that is?
Yes. It's a copy of a notice saying that I voided the check.
What month was the check voided for?
I voided it in June.
I'm sorry, what was the check date?
Oh, the check date was April 18th, 2017.
Does that refresh your memory that the April check was lost?
It was probably lost, yes.
And then reissued?
Reissued.
If we could go to page 2 of this exhibit, thank you, can we blow up the top portion of this? Can you tell us what this is?
That's a copy of the stop payment report that we get from the bank.
Is that something that you do as a routine matter when you lose a check?
Yes. When we put a stop, you get this confirmation.
And when you get the confirmation, you put that in the file?
Yes.
And is this for that check that was dated in April?
Yes.
Thank you. We can take that down. Does that refresh your memory that April check and then reissued later on in June?
Should have been, yes.
If we could pull up People's 37D, just blow up the top portion. Yes. Is this another email from Mr. McConney to you?
Yes.
What's the date on this?
May 22nd, 2017.
Does it have an attachment from what you can see?
Yes.
What's the body of the email?
The body of the email says, Deb, please pay.
Is this another approval email?
Yes.
If we could pull up People's 11, is this the invoice for May attached to that email?
Yes.
Does it have your approval stamp on it?
Yes.
Or your accounts payable stamp?
Excuse me, yes.
Who sent this invoice in?
Michael Cohen.
We could take that down. Pull up People's 12. Now, is this the MDS voucher related to that invoice?
Yes.
Does it have the invoice description in there?
Yes.
What is that?
Retainer for May 2017.
And this is being drawn from which account?
From Mr. Trump's personal account.
And paid to?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
We could pull up People's 13 in evidence. Is this the stub related to the check that was generated?
Yeah.
Who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount of the check?
$35,000.
The description?
Retainer, May 2017.
And the account that it's being drawn from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
If we can just look at the check itself. At the top left, do you see the name of the account?
Yes.
What's the name on the account?
Donald J. Trump.
And the check amount?
$35,000.
Who is it being paid to?
Michael Cohen.
And do you see a signature there?
Yes.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Now, did you every month for the rest of the year cut a check to Michael Cohen for $35,000?
If I got an invoice, approved invoice, yes.
If we could pull up People's 375, if we could just blow up the top email. In looking at that, can you read the body of the email to us?
It says, Deb, please pay June and put a stop on the April 13th, 2017. Check number 2639 cut out of DJT and replace it. Any questions? Please call me. Thanks, Jeff.
That is an email to you?
Yes.
From Mr. McConney?
Yes.
Is that another approval email?
Yes.
Does that also help explain what happened to the April check?
Yes.
What's the date of this email?
June 16th, 2017.
If we could pull up People's 15, is this the MDS voucher associated with the invoice for June?
Yes.
And does it have the information that you entered into the MDS system?
Yes.
If we could pull up People's 16, if we could just take a look at the check, what account is this drawn on?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Who is being paid?
Michael Cohen.
How much?
$35,000.
And do you recognize the signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Thank you, you can take that down. Now, if we could pull up People's 17, can we blow up sort of the middle portion of that? Do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
What is this?
It's an email, an invoice.
An invoice?
Uh-huh.
Do you know what month it relates to?
July.
And who is the invoice from?
Michael Cohen?
Who did he send that to?
Alan Weisselberg.
Whose handwriting is that at the bottom? Do you know?
Mine.
What does it say?
It says, pay same amount per Alan and Jeff. It doesn't have the amount, so I asked what amount should I pay.
When you say same amount, what did that mean to you?
$35,000.
So, the same amount that you've been paying January, February, March, April, May, June?
Yes.
Is that your stamp again on this invoice?
Yes.
We can take that down. Sorry, could you put that back up for 1 second? And was this invoice for services rendered in the month of July?
Yes.
2017?
Yes.
Thank you. You can take that down. Did you enter the information from the invoice into the MDS system the way you usually do?
Yes.
If we could just pull up People's 18, just blow up the top portion. Is this the MDS voucher that relates to that invoice?
Yes.
If you look in the invoice description, what does it say?
Retainer, July 2017.
And if we could pull up what is in evidence as People's 19, if you could just blow up the check, which account is this being drawn on?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And the money is going to who?
Michael Cohen.
The amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize the signature on this?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
And if you can take down just the blow up for a moment, and just to remind us, so this document would have been stapled to that invoice and presented for signature. Is that how you did it?
Yes.
Now, if we could go to People's 20, do you recognize this?
Yes.
And what is this?
It's another invoice.
For what month?
Looks like August.
And again, is it for Michael Cohen?
Yes.
And is it for services rendered that month?
Yes.
Does it have an amount in the invoice?
I don't see it on this part. No.
Is that your stamp down below?
Yes.
Based on that stamp, do you believe that you got an approval email for this invoice?
Yes.
And what's the amount written in there?
$35,000.
And what's the entity?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And what's the general ledger code here?
51505, legal.
If we could pull up People's 21, just blow up the top portion. Is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes.
If you look at the invoice description, what does it say?
Retainer for August 2017.
What account is this payment going to be drawn from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And what amount?
$35,000.
Could you pull up People's 22? Is this the check generated from that voucher?
Yes.
Who is it paid to?
Michael Cohen.
From what account?
Mr. Trump's account.
The amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Judge, would this be a right time for a break?
Yes, I think so. Jurors, let's take our afternoon recess.
All rise, whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are excused.
You can step down, Ms. Tarasoff. Whereupon the witness is excused. Whereupon a recess is taken. Let's get the witness, please.
Witness entering. The witness, Deborah Tarasoff, enters the courtroom and resumed the witness stand.
Let's get the jury, please.
All rise. Jury entering. Jury enters.
You may be seated.
Case on trial continued. All jurors are present and properly seated.
Mr. Conroy.
Thank you, Judge. I think as we were walking through those exhibits, I missed one. So if we could pull up People's 14. And do you recognize what this is? And can we put that up for everybody? Thank you. Ms. Tarasoff, what is this?
That looks like another invoice. Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Sure. Can we blow up the middle portion?
That's enough. Thank you. It's another invoice.
And what's the date on it?
June 16th, 2017.
And can you just read what it says under Dear Alan?
Pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of May 2017 and June 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And is that another invoice that you processed and we already discussed the other documents related to it?
Yes.
If we could pull up People's 24? I'm sorry. Can we do People's 23 first? And Ms. Tarasoff, if we could blow up just the middle portion of this.
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the months of August and September 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And if you could take down the blow-up. And do you see the accounts payable stamp there?
Yes.
Did you put that stamp there?
Yes.
And what account did this come from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Now, if we could pull up People's 24, and if we could just pull out the top part, who's the entity paying?
The entity is Donald Trump.
And the invoice description?
Retainer, September 2017.
And what's the amount?
$35,000.
And I'm not sure I've asked you this. How does a check get generated once you put this information into your MDS system and this voucher is created?
A printer prints it out.
And how does that, do you have to hit a button or something?
Yes.
So whenever you're ready for it, there is a way.
I schedule it.
You can schedule it through the MDS system and it
Prints it out.
prints it out. And if we could pull up People's 25, and is this what the check prints out on?
Yes.
Obviously without the signature?
Yes.
If we could just blow up the check itself, what account is this drawn on?
From Mr. Trump's personal account.
And who is it going to be paid to?
Michael Cohen.
The amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose is it?
Mr. Trump's.
If we could now pull up People's 26, and again, if we could just blow up just the top part first, and is this another invoice?
Yes, it is.
Would you just read the body of the invoice for us?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of October 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And if you take down just the blow up, is that your accounts payable stamp?
Yes, it is.
Could we pull up what's in evidence as People's 27? And is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes, it is.
And what is the invoice description?
Retainer, October 2017.
What's the amount of the invoice?
$35,000.
And what account is this going to be drawn from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
And if we could now pull up People's 28, and if you could just blow up the check, thank you. Who is the account holder?
Donald Trump.
The person receiving the money?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the check amount?
$35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Thank you. If we could now pull up what's in evidence as People's 29. And do you recognize, is this another invoice?
Yes, it is.
For what month?
November.
Of 2017.
Yes.
And can you just read us the body of the invoice?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly payment for services rendered for the month of Bear 2017. Thank you, Michael Cohen.
Thank you. And if you could just take down the blow up. And is that, again, the accounts payable stamp?
Yes.
And did you put that on there?
Yes.
And is that your handwriting?
Yes.
And if we could pull up People's 30. You are way ahead of me. Is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes.
And what's the invoice description?
Retainer, November 2017.
What account is this coming from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
And who is the payee?
Michael Cohen.
If we could now pull up what's in evidence as People's 31. And if you could just blow up the check portion, what account is this coming from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
What's the amount?
$35,000.
Who is it going to?
Michael Cohen.
If you could just take down the blow up. And if I could just ask again, so this is the document that you would staple to the invoice to send out for signature?
Yes.
Now, if we could go to People's 32, and do you recognize this?
It's another invoice.
And can you just blow up the middle portion? And could you read us the body of the invoice?
Dear Alan, pursuant to the retainer agreement, kindly remit payment for services rendered for the month of December 2017. Thank you. Michael Cohen.
And could you pull up People's 33? Is this the MDS voucher associated with that invoice?
Yes.
And that's for December 2017?
Yes.
Which account is this coming from?
Mr. Trump's personal account.
Who is the employee?
Michael Cohen.
And what is the invoice description?
Retainer, December of 2017.
And what is the check number?
3006.
And the amount?
35,000.
And if we could pull up People's 34, and if we could just blow up the check, do you see the check number on here?
Yes.
What's the check number?
3006.
And is this again from the DJT account?
Yes, it is.
Who is the recipient of the money?
Michael Cohen.
What's the amount?
35,000.
And do you recognize that signature?
Yes, I do.
Whose signature is that?
Mr. Trump's.
Just one moment, please, Judge. Thank you, Judge. I have nothing further.
Mr. Blanche.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Miss Tarasoff. How are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm good. We have never met before, have we?
No.
You testified a little bit about your work for the Trump Organization since 2000. Would you describe it as a family business?
Yes.
And you mentioned Eric Trump over the years, correct?
Yes.
Don Jr. over the years?
Yes, uh-huh.
How about Ivanka Trump?
Yes.
And you were asked some questions focusing on the 2016-2017's time frame. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
And I believe you said that for many years President Trump was around a lot. He was at Trump Tower a lot. Did it change when he was running for president?
Yes.
He was around less?
Yes.
And then, obviously, when he was elected president, there was a time in between the election and the time he went to Washington, D.C., correct?
Yes.
And he was focused at that point on getting ready to be president?
I think so.
And then, obviously, and you said this, but then once in January, he left and was in Washington, D.C. for 4 years, correct?
Correct.
And you testified about the process that worked for many years with Ms. Graff, where you would take a check with an invoice to President Trump, and then you would get it back at some point, correct?
Yes.
And sometimes the check wasn't signed?
Yes.
And that happened. But the checks that we just went through for the past hour and a half, except for the one that was canceled, none of those were voided out by President Trump, correct?
Correct.
But you don't know what President Trump did at the White House or wherever he was when he signed those checks, right? He wasn't in New York for those, correct?
Correct.
And so you described the process where they would be Federal Expressed, as far as you know?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
But that's really all you know about that process, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you testified about President Trump himself. You did not interact with him a lot over the years, correct?
Correct.
And did you and your boss, it sounded like they varied a little bit, but in 2016 and 2017, it was Mr. McConney?
Yes.
Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
And so, when we saw the back and forth with the emails a few minutes ago, where Mr. McConney would say, "Hey, Deb, please pay," that was what happened all the time, correct?
Yes.
And the same thing at times with Mr. Weisselberg?
Yes.
So, you didn't have authority to cut a check on your own, correct?
Correct.
So, but, is it fair to say that when you testified that you believed or you thought that Mr. Weisselberg and President Trump talked a lot, you weren't present for those conversations, right?
Right.
So when Mr. Weisselberg, on some of the emails that we saw, or Mr. McConney told you to go ahead and pay it, generate a check, you didn't get permission from President Trump himself, correct?
Correct.
And you understood that when you were told to do that by Mr. Weisselberg or by Mr. McConney, it was approved and you did it, correct?
Yes.
Now, there were a fair number of questions about the canceled check. So putting that one aside for a moment, the rest of the checks that you generated at the time, or even now, you have no reason to believe there was anything wrong with doing that, correct?
That's right.
You knew Mr. Cohen when he worked for the Trump Organization, correct?
Yes.
And you saw emails after he left saying that he was the personal attorney to President Trump.
Yes.
And during the time working for President Trump, which sounds like it was a long time, and there were a couple of years when he was president when you weren't working for him direct, correct?
Correct.
But the time prior to that, you never had any reason to believe that President Trump was hiding anything or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
If I may just have one more moment.
Defense counsel confer.
Thank you, Ms. Tarasoff. I have no further questions.
Just one moment.
ADAs confer.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tarasoff. You can step down.
Thank you.
Counsel, please approach.
At sidebar.
Do you have any more witnesses for today?
Yes, we can recall Georgia Longstreet Joseph and do some more with her that we didn't get to do on Friday.
We object to that, Your Honor. We object to recalling this witness. I mean, we didn't even know she was a witness until last Wednesday. Last Wednesday afternoon, we were informed that she was a witness, and we were given a certain number of exhibits that she was going to be offering. We obviously spent time preparing not only objections, but we were also preparing for cross. She testified on Friday morning. We crossed her. She admitted exhibits. And then at the next sidebar, they said, "We're going to recall her. The rules don't allow for that." I mean, it's discretionary to recall a witness, of course, but it can't just be that we can put a witness on, have us cross her, prepare a witness.
We can excuse the jury for the day and we can talk about this. I will excuse the jury for the day and we can talk about it.
All right.
Okay.
Sidebar concluded.
Jurors, we are going to stop a little bit early today. As I excuse you, I will ask you, please do not talk, either among yourselves or with anyone else, about anything related to the case. Please continue to keep an open mind. Do not form or express an opinion about the defendant's guilt or innocence until all of the evidence is in. I have given you my final jury instructions on the law, and I have directed you to begin your deliberations. Do not request agree to accept or discuss with any person the receipt or acceptance of any payment or benefit in return for supplying any information concerning the trial. Report directly to me any incident within your knowledge involving an attempt by any person to improperly influence you or any member of the jury. Do not visit or view any of the premises or locations discussed in the testimony. And do not use any program or electronic device to search for or view any location discussed in the testimony. Do not read, view, or listen to any accounts or discussions about the case. That includes the reading or the listening to the reading of any transcripts of the trial or the reading of posts on the court site. Do not attempt to research any fact, issue, or law related to the case. Do not communicate with anyone about the case by any means, including by telephone, text messages, email, chat rooms, blogs, or the Internet. And do not Google or search for any information about the case or the law that applies to the case or anything else involved in the case. Have a good night, and we will see you tomorrow.
All rise. Jury exits.
Thank you. You may be seated. So, people, you would like to recall a witness?
That's right, Judge.
And what would you like that witness to testify to?
Among other things, some additional tweets and truths from the defendant, as well as as a summary witness to go through some of the texts that were admitted as part of People's 171A. As you know, there was a lot of back and forth about that exhibit, about certain items that were redacted. We tabled it and agreed to have a summary witness read it later. I would like to address counsel's arguments from the bench, but also to address some additional arguments that counsel has made. And I don't think through any bad, but it's just not true. And counsel has said this several times, that counsel has not had notice of the exhibits that we are going to use. First of all, we have been designating exhibits for the last 8 months periodically on a rolling basis, and with very few exceptions, had designated all of our exhibits by March 15th. The court had a request from the people to extend, and you extended that deadline over the defendant's objection to March 25th, and we served a few additional exhibits. But it's not like this is the first time that these exhibits have been brought to counsel's attention. Second of all, before the trial started, we provided redacted versions of all of the exhibits we intended to introduce at trial, as well as an exhibit list. On April 11th, we had a lengthy conversation with counsel in which we listed precisely which Trump Organization-produced exhibits we would be seeking to introduce. And we did that because we were discussing a potential stipulation that didn't end up happening. But these exhibits have been designated for a very long time, so I don't think counsel is intentionally misleading the court to say that, they just found out yesterday that these exhibits were going to be admitted. What we have been doing is notifying counsel the day before who the next day's witnesses are going to be. The reason for this, as we've made clear, because the defendant has been violating the order, restricting extrajudicial speech, and we did not want to have the next witnesses' names out there. The defense has our witness list, has had it for months. That list includes Ms. Longstreet, who testified on Friday, and all of the witnesses who will be testifying at the trial. I'm saying this because I don't like the impression being left that we are somehow sandbagging the defense by telling them the day before who our witnesses are or what our exhibits are. They may not be finding out the order of which we're going to be calling these witnesses or introducing these exhibits. But they have had the entire witness list and the exhibit list for a very long time. Getting back to your Honor's question about Ms. Longstreet, we called her on Friday, as you remember, and let me just first say that, of course, the court has inherent authority to control the order and the mechanics of witness examination during the trial. As you know, we learned Thursday that a juror had a medical appointment or issue that required early departure on Friday. There were certain aspects of Ms. Longstreet's testimony that needed to come in before Hope Hicks could testify, and so we called her and truncated her direct examination so that we could get her off the stand and get Ms. Hicks on the stand so that we could hopefully finish her and not have to get her back today, because the juror had to leave. And as you recall, we timed that pretty closely. I think we ended on Friday at 3:30, and the juror had to leave sometime between 3:30 and 3:45. So shortly after, we discussed Ms. Longstreet. We notified, we put on the record at a bench conference that we intended to recall her. I don't think that there is any remote prejudice that the defense will suffer from allowing us to recall her for these limited purposes. which, as I said, includes some additional tweets that were not relevant to Ms. Hicks' testimony, but are relevant to a subsequent witness testimony. And then to have, really, the bulk of her testimony will involve going through the exhibit that had been the subject of a lot of back and forth about which portions were appropriate to redact. And I believe at the time that we finalized that, we indicated that we would use a summary witness to read those texts.
Mr. Blanche.
Your Honor, I'm looking at the January 29th, 2024 witness list, and Ms. Longstreet is not on it. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong, but that's what I am referencing when I said that to the court, that I didn't have her name. Secondly, I did not say to the court at sidebar that we did not know the exhibits. I said we did not know which exhibits the people were going to offer with respect to this witness. She's not on it. And so the point was that when they told us included on the witness list was a custodian from the X Corp and a custodian from Truth Social. So when we learned that she was going to be testifying and getting those exhibits in, as Your Honor knows, we objected. And we prepared a cross based upon our understanding of what she was going to be allowed to admit. We didn't know, like I said, her name until Wednesday afternoon. We then performed the cross, assuming those were the exhibits she was going to offer. As the court is aware, part of the cross was that I think the point was that of the however many thousands of social media posts she was tasked with reviewing, the witness testified to only 7 or 9, whatever the numbers were that she was asked to identify and admitted in evidence. I did not know at the time, because no one told us what was just said today, was that there was timing and scheduling issues, and so they only intended to call this witness to get a few exhibits in, and then they intended to recall her. That's not the way it's supposed to work. And I agree with the people that it's absolutely within your discretion, under the rules, under Rule 107. But if you look at the cases, to the extent that there are cases on this issue, the reasons given for recalling a witness, at least that I have found, do not include a summary witness who they call just to get some stuff in, not tell anybody they're going to recall them, and then after the witness leaves the stand and say, oh, we're going to recall her.
Let me ask you, what's the prejudice to you?
The cross itself is the prejudice, Your Honor. We crossed the witness and said, and asked her about all, like I just said. It turns out that was totally wrong. It turns out that there are more exhibits that she was asked to offer and admit into evidence. And again, she's doing this as an employee of the district attorney's office, not as a custodian of X or Truth Social.
I'm not really following. If she takes the stand and she testifies as to additional tweets and truths, and it's a summary witness for dice to the defendant, Exhibit 171. What is the prejudice to the defendant?
The cross-examination of her on Friday included, in part, Your Honor, the fact that she was only being asked about 7 to 9 after reviewing thousands of social media posts by President Trump. And I believe she said, however, other folks, she said 10 or 15 other folks. The only evidence that the people had asked her to admit and to offer and to get into evidence were the 7 that were admitted. So it certainly doesn't help our defense that it turns out that there was a wrong amount. It turns out that there were other ones.
How many more are we talking about?
3.
3?
But, Your Honor, I'm not sure why that matters, Your Honor. Again.
Well, it matters.
She said that's all there was.
It matters that you are saying that there's prejudice, that somehow you look bad, that it's somehow she had looked at thousands and she only found 7. Now you are saying the prejudice is that it really wasn't the case. She's introducing more, but she's only introducing 3 more.
Judge, think about what we were just told, that they knew at the time, apparently on Friday, that they were only going to use this witness to get in enough exhibits to get them through Friday. If they would have said that to us, which they should have if that was their case, we could have adjusted our cross accordingly. Again, it matters. We don't have any idea who the witness is tomorrow. We still don't know. We found out about this witness, found out her name on Wednesday.
Right. When do you intend to call Ms. Longstreet?
Well, we could have done it this afternoon, but I think we should start with a new witness who we will. We have been, as a matter of courtesy. We were ordered not to provide counsel with the name of the witnesses for the next day until the next afternoon. I'll do so as soon as we are off the record. Give the name for the witness for tomorrow. I don't think we will get to Ms. Longstreet until Thursday or Friday.
All right. Well, I would like you to give the defense 24 hours notice before you call Ms. Longstreet.
We can do that.
So that they can prepare. And also let them know the exhibits which are be produced so that they can prepare their cross.
Thank you.
Now, generally speaking, how are we scheduling?
Well.
You are doing well.
Yes.
Can you give me a little more than that?
Yes, I apologize for that, Judge. Are you asking how much longer I think it's going?
Very roughly.
Okay, I would say about 2 more weeks.
This week plus next week, or?
This week plus next week and into the week after, but maybe only a day or two. Here are some Fridays that we are now off that we were not originally off.
Right.
That are coming up. So the very, very rough estimate, I would say 2 weeks from tomorrow, maybe.
All right, and I won't hold you to that.
Okay.
But, just by way of reminder, we are not meeting on the 17th. We are also not meeting on the 24th. And then Monday, the 27th, is Memorial Day.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else from the defense?
No.
All right. See you tomorrow.
Whereupon, at this time, the matter was adjourned to Tuesday, May 7th, 2024, at 9:30 a.m.